and workspace. And the future of our workspace and our workplace will look really different moving forward, whether that's by industry, location, or more. And for young people entering the workforce, this is definitely going to change our outlook on where to work and what we value in our jobs and our careers. In short, it's just going to change our culture tremendously. I'm so excited to hear from these experts on how the industry is changing and how it will affect all of us. And most importantly, we'll hear how they're adapting. So before we begin, I'm going to provide a quick overview with Cisco WebEx platform, so you can ask our speakers questions and make sure you can invite your friends. So we highly recommend you view the live cast through the Google Chrome extension instead of your browser. This will be super quick to download, and it'll be a lot easier to engage with our speakers. And on that note, please use the Q&A function on the bottom right of your screen. This will allow you to ask all of our speakers questions. The last 10 minutes of each session, we will allot for audience questions, so make sure to submit those. It's not too late to invite a colleague to today's live cast. If you know someone interested in the topic, feel free to just send them today's URL and they'll be able to log in at any time. For anyone not able to join today's fireside chats or live cast, we will have all of these sessions available on an on-demand link on our website or on our YouTube page, so be sure to check that out. Almost done. For anyone looking for a dial-in number, you can dial in here on your phone. Just open up the same widget as your Q&A widget and choose audio connection. This will allow you to provide your cell phone so you can dial in. Lastly, be sure to engage with us on Twitter and LinkedIn using the hashtag BILivecast. I'll definitely remind all of you later so we can see what you're talking about and what you want to hear from our speakers today. So we hope you are looking forward to today's live cast. We're going to be hearing from senior marketing leaders from Cisco WebEx, Gensler, Ford Motor, Industria, CBRE, and many more. So I'll be back in between sessions to introduce our next group of speakers. So moving in to our first session of the day, I'm thrilled to introduce Aruna Ravichandran to the stage. Aruna is the Chief Marketing Officer for Cisco WebEx. She is responsible for Cisco's $6 billion collaboration technology business. She's a passionate advocate for customers and has 20 plus years of experience in the technology industry. Aruna leads product marketing, brand management, digital marketing, demand generation events, a lot of things for Cisco WebEx. And this session will be moderated by James Dennis. James is the Vice President of Global Partnerships and Strategy for Vox Media. So welcome to the stage, Aruna. It's great to see you again. How are you doing? Oh, Aruna, it looks like we can't hear you. Just make sure to unmute somewhere on your screen. Sorry about that. Hi, James.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming in clear.
All right.
Let's give Aruna just a minute. Make sure she gets her sound on. I know we're doing this a little different this time.
Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, you're all set, Aruna. All good. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you, James, and I'll be back at the end.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks, Isabel. And hey there, Aruna. How are you?
I'm doing great, James. Very, very nice to meet you again.
Nice to meet you again as well, and excited to kick off what sounds like a great day of conversation around a very important topic that I think is on all of our minds right now, and in terms of kind of what is the future of work and the workforce and workplace and everything we have to look forward to. I guess, Aruna, just to kind of dive in here real quick, I think over the course of the last 5 months, we've probably experienced maybe 5 years of transformation when it comes to kind of the workforce. Curious to get your views on how these changes, what has happened, what changes have taken place, and then kind of what do you anticipate for the immediate future in terms of the future of work?
So, I'm here at Cisco, I'm living and breathing it and seeing it for not just the last 6-7 months since the COVID era, but even before the COVID era, right? So everybody's had something to do around work transformation. at the Executive Briefing Center, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of the CIOs, people who manage facilities in large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies around the world. And every one of them used to have something around workplace transformation as a key part of their strategic initiative. And before COVID, all companies were looking for ways to make offices much more appealing in order to provide their employees a way to basically collaborate anywhere, anytime, whether it's in the office or while they were in the move or while they were working out of their mobile offices or even from their homes. While companies were looking for ways to make that much more attractive, we all had to transform our business model, dropped at one day when the whole thing actually started with the pandemic. And because of that, the future of work is not about where you go, it's about what you do. And so this global experiment has proven that work can happen anywhere, anytime, and productivity continues to remain no matter where you actually work. So the better question is to say, where do we actually go from here, right? So everyone had work transformation as a part of their strategic initiative for the last 5 years. But this experiment has transformed radically given the last 5 months. And the future of work is already here now and is here to stay. And in my mind, it's going to be a hybrid future of work as we look into the future.
I think you bring up a really great point around, from an industry perspective, some of these industries there was some disruption that was frankly already underway, and for many industries, it would feel like this COVID has kind of supercharged that that transformation. Education, healthcare come to mind. Curious to get your thoughts on kind of the impact on those industries and really which ones could be next.
I would say industries across the board had to transform because work had to continue to happen, and companies needed to bring their innovations to market at a rapid velocity. But if you look at let's take healthcare as an example. I would say healthcare has gone through a major transformation, and that hybrid methodology around telehealth is here to stay. I was talking to the director for the Department of Public Health at Georgia University recently, and what she shared with me was that they used to have telehealth best practices so that they can continue to provide, for example, virtual training or virtual way for being able to enable patients as well as underlying children, especially to go through their therapy sessions. And previously, there were very, very few families and patients who used to actually adopt this virtual way of being able to continue to learn from the doctors as well as the therapists. But once the COVID actually hit, she told me the transformation was magical and instantaneous. People who never used to use video conferencing technologies immediately adopted and learned the technology. And now they actually did a survey with their underlying customers as well as their patients, and they've realized that telehealth is here to stay. And they have now actually started to think about net new business models in terms of how they can further enable and help the communities, because they can actually continue to provide experiences, whether it is therapy sessions, whether it's training for their underlying employees. All of that can actually be done in a virtual way, and they can actually patients can get access to specialists, physicians whom they never used to have access before because they lived in rural environments. And given this whole pandemic, the whole telehealth concept has actually accelerated. Everybody has gotten to understand how to use video conferencing as well as collaboration technology. And so the whole healthcare industry has seen a major transformation, and I think that is here to stay. Now let's take an example for education. Many universities used to have virtual education, but it primarily was not the primary form of education across the board, right? So they used to have probably evening hours where people could, continue to enable their learning by taking virtual lessons. But now it's gone mainstream. And so universities are definitely trying to look at what could be additional ways in order to increase their business models and come up with revenue streams, as well as extend, the art of imparting education to many, many, many more students located across around the world. So I would say even the education industry, right now, everybody's gone into the virtual learning, but I would say that is going to continue to stay. Not that all students are going to, always be as a part of virtual learning, because I think a big part of virtual learning, you lose the ability in order to interact with other students. And for some of the coursework, which requires a lot of lab work, you still need to be at school. But I would say it gives a lot of universities and schools an additional way in order to continue to basically impart education to the rest of the world. And so I'm pretty sure a lot of people are actually thinking about that. And that in itself is also going to give an opportunity for tremendous amount of innovation. So if you think about education, for example, how can you continue to impart education while keeping students engaged? And how can technology help you do that? How can you make sure that you're proctoring exams and people are not cheating while they're going through virtual learning? And so there needs to be technology which will basically help them do that. I would also think that it is also going to bring a little bit of controversies across the board, because if you have to have any kind of intrusive software, which is going to be there in play during the time when students are actually going through their exams, people might feel that their identity or their personal information is being compromised. There is going to be a lot of learnings which are going to come out of that, but there is also going to be an opportunity in order to come up with new innovations in order to further enable the hybrid learning environment.
Yeah, I love the points that you made there around trust in the education industry, but really it exists across the board in all industries as we think about what hybrid and remote workforces look like, and the adjustments, in terms of mindset that companies need to adopt in order to continue to motivate their employees the best ways possible. I think that's a great segue into kind of the role that culture plays here, and the changes and disruption that's going on there amongst many companies' strategies towards it. On one end of the spectrum, you have many industries or companies that are very much, we need our workforce in the office, and it's very important that we collaborate in kind of face to face. On the other end of the spectrum, you see a lot of companies saying it's okay, you can work from wherever you want as long as the work is getting done, and then a whole bunch in the middle. I guess in your opinion, how can companies continue to prioritize culture for hybrid and remote workforces, knowing the importance to company identity and employee value?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question, because at one end of the spectrum, there are companies whose goal is to basically get people back into the office. At the other end, there are companies who are now permanently going to let their employees, work wherever they want as they move forward. Companies who are actually going to adopt a hybrid way to basically get some people back into the office, or potentially part-time, or even a couple of days in a week. And so you're going to see multitudes of ways where companies are going to continue to adopt best practices in order to continue with this hybrid environment. But when you think about it in the context of the culture, you have to think about how can you extend the culture to include remote workers. Right? So this does not mean about lifting and shifting the existing culture, especially if it is heavily skewed towards being in the office, because most companies, you never used to have this, remote culture as a part of their best practice. And so you can just lift and shift your existing culture and bring that as a best practice into a remote learning environment. So think of the culture as being an umbrella that covers all workers, no matter where they are actually located. And this is where leadership is extremely important, and they have to play a big role. Leaders have to set the tone. They have to set the culture, drive the culture, and make a difference between an effective digital environment and one that is just like a make-do environment. And so, for example, as a leader, you can establish, this virtual water cooler days. I actually wrote a LinkedIn blog about this particular topic. While you were in the office, many a times you would take a would go to a water cooler, or you would go to your break room or your cafeteria, it doesn't matter, so that you can network with other employees. And now, given this virtual environment, you still have the ability to do that by establishing dedicated time in order to continue that as a part of your culture across the board. Another thing is, especially when you think about a remote or a hybrid environment, it's about communication. It's okay, it's completely okay to over communicate, because if you have teams located across multiple different geographies, sometimes things could get lost in translation. So making sure that you have established a sequence of communication is very, very critical. And here at Cisco, we have embraced the remote work completely and fully. Our leadership team has helped maintain that connectedness with the employees by conducting weekly check-ins at Chuck's level for the last 5 months. And so, that's been a lot of all hands for a company like Cisco, but that's definitely played a role in terms of making sure that people feel that they're connected, their voice is still being heard. As we are trying to understand, what it takes in order to basically, adopt and run a company in a remote environment, I would say culture is extremely important. And I would say there is going to be a new way to basically operate in this particular paradigm. And it's all about three important things in my mind. I call them the 3 E's. It's about engagement, empowerment, and empathy. And those are 3 important 3 E's, which every company needs to definitely keep in mind in order to continue to establish that trust with their employees, so that culture becomes an important element to move the work forward along.
That's great. I love the 3 E's and how you all are thinking about it and keeping the lines of communication open. I think it's interesting to think about, kind of the perception of a remote workforce or a blended or hybrid. And you think about kind of the career stage that individuals are in, right? And so when you brought up networking a couple of times, for people that are perhaps a bit more established in their career, they've had the opportunity to develop those networks and frankly, kind of like run their businesses based in part on those. When thinking about kind of, Gen Z, for example, and some, folks that are just entering the workforce, this is a really interesting environment for a number of reasons to do that. But establishing a network from in a remote or hybrid environment comes with a specific set of challenges. Curious to get your thoughts on kind of Gen Z's, development, their ability to adapt to this and the role that technology will play in supporting them in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, interesting start with you. If you think about the workforce currently, for the very first time in a couple of decades, you actually have a quad generational workforce. When I say you have a quad generational workforce, you have the baby boomers who should have retired, but they have not actually retired and they've extended their time in the workforce. And then there is the Gen X population. Then there is the Gen Y or the millennials. Gen Y and millennial are synonymous to each other. And then the last one is the Gen Z population, who are just entering the workforce. And I would say it's a hard time to actually really enter the workforce. And this is where companies really need to leverage technology in order to make the people entering the workforce, whether it is a Gen Z population or a Gen Y, if you're actually joining a new workforce or a new company, how do you basically build that particular network? And so being able to institutionalize that with the underlying cultural element, maybe having a mentor assigned to someone who's basically joining the new company, and having a regular check-ins and one-on-ones, especially with the Gen Z and Gen Y, this is extremely critical because they don't have the network. They don't know how the company actually operates, and figuring out virtual ways, like I said, the virtual water cooler, or figuring out regular one-on-ones, regular check-ins, establishing a mentor or a sponsor within the community and the system, so that they get acclimated to the culture as well as the technology, so that they can, very easily blend into their work environment. Because it's very easy to become myopic working within single groups or teams, because the relationships are already there. And even if you have to take those relationships into a remote environment, you can continue to thrive and adopt in a remote environment if the relationships are already there. But if you don't have the relationships, and whether it is a Gen Z or it is a Gen X, it does not matter, and you're entering the workforce, especially at this particular time, there needs to be a way where you can get get acclimated to the work environment. Probably the Gen X population know how to do that, but I would say the younger population, Gen Y and Gen Z, they definitely need help. In order to basically get engaged and connected much more broadly across the board. We also have to find ways to maintain and extend the lines of communication to cross over the inevitable silos that could actually arise, right? And we also have to lead distributed teams where people are less important than the work they do. In my opinion, if work gets done, who cares where people are actually going to be located? And right now, technology has played a tremendous role. If you think about it, without that, this future, especially given the pandemic, could not have happened. If we didn't have the technology, just think for 1 second. Let's say we didn't have the technology which we have today, and this pandemic had actually happened. Could work have actually progressed along? Not at all, right? So we have the tools available to us, which we didn't have like, even 10, 15 years ago. And these tools have allowed us to basically be productive, and business continuity has happened despite the pandemic. And so video conferencing, which was leveraged by a lot of organizations, small, medium, and small, is now like bread and butter. It's like water and air. And so more and more people are turning on their cameras. Before the pandemic, video conferencing technology was there, but very, very few people used to turn on their cameras. What we saw during the pandemic with WebEx, 99% of the time, everyone actually turns on their cameras. And why is that? It's because people want to feel connected. They're living in a virtual world. And the technology allows you to basically make sure that you are represented very well. So here is an example. We all had to shift and work from home. And, many people were working out of attics, people were working out of bedrooms, people dining rooms, doesn't matter, right? Because nobody knew and nobody had actually planned for this. And some people were actually embarrassed because they did not have a proper setup in an office environment. And with technology, you didn't have to worry about that, because you could come up with these beautiful custom virtual backgrounds. You could pretend that you're working from the beach, or you could be working from your actual office environment. You could create a custom background, and people didn't have to know where you were actually joining the meeting. Here is another use case. People think that it's only about video conferencing technology. Video conferencing is absolutely important. Like I said, it's bread and butter, but it's more than video conferencing. We want to do that instant communication with chats. And that chat needs to evolve into brainstorming sessions. How do you continue to do brainstorming sessions without being in front of a group of people with a whiteboard? Technology allows you to do that. With WebEx, you can basically bring up a virtual whiteboard, and I can actually brainstorm and draw out and have a live design session with the creative marketeers on my team. And could you have done that before? Not at all. So that's why I would say technology has been radically transformed, and that has continued to help us, move work along the way. And I would say technology is going to continue to evolve. Here is another use case. A lot of companies are starting to think about, what are their critical workers? For example, IT, they need to bring back into the office, but they need to bring people back into the office while making sure that people feel safe. People can continue to practice social distancing policies, and technology now allows you to do that. How is that? For example, beautiful WebEx devices and rooms. If you go into a conference room today, and that conference room, let's say, can only take 3 people because of the square footage, the WebEx device in the room will automatically give you a notice if a 4th person actually joins the conference room and say, this room has reached its maximum capacity, you have to practice social distancing, and 1 person has to leave the conferencing room. Another use case is that, let's say somebody actually used a device in the office, it will automatically send a notification to cleaning so that people can come back and clean the conference room. Right. So there are so many different use cases which have come to market given the pandemic. And I would say technology is continuing to play a transformational role so that people feel that they are connected, they are engaged, and they feel safe, and they are productive regardless of where they're going to work, whether they're going to work at home or they're going to work in the office.
Yeah, you touched on a number of points there. One of which was super important. At this point, video conferencing is table stakes, right? And you brought up the idea that there are tools that are being kind of developed within these platforms, Cisco among others, that promote collaboration, have unique value to organizations. Silos exist in many workforces. It would appear to me that kind of the introduction of remote and hybrid blended workforces it could increase that risk of reinforcing those silos, and that's something that I think that the products that you mentioned are going to be paramount to making sure that collaboration can not just exist but excel in these types of workforces. I guess sticking with that for a second, the product side, how do you see that developing from a collaboration perspective? I would say that, again, folks are using the video conferencing piece of it as like, okay, that's expected. I think where, Cisco and others are going to continue to differentiate themselves is the ability to introduce new products that will promote productivity through collaboration.
Absolutely. So, for example, let's take the use case, right? Like we all know that the future of work is going to be a hybrid future of work, meaning that people will have the flexibility and ability to make work happen anywhere, anytime, whether they're working from home or in the office or in their mobile office while they're traveling. So that is going to be the future of work. And so if you think specifically, I gave you some of the use cases around social distancing, which we actually have within our tools. But if I look into the future, I would say, coming smart offices and smart technology with AI is going to play a tremendous role in terms of automation. Here is one use case which we already have, and we are further going to evolve this particular use case. If I go into my office today, I haven't gone into my office. I'm not classified as a critical worker to basically be in the office, but I know, talking to the folks who have been there, like especially with IT, you can go into your open space environment, and if you want to join a meeting, you don't even have to touch your device, or you don't even have to touch your laptop. You can go into those open or closed spaces if you want to have a confidential meeting, and you can say, "Hey, Webex, join a meeting," and boom, you're in a meeting. And that's where voice assistants are going to play a predominant role. And it's not just about having a voice assistant. It's about being able to teach it multiple different skills, like you can do with Alexa or Google Voice, so on and so forth, right? So even with video conferencing technology as well as collaboration technology, you should be able to do a lot of additional different things as you think about the future. You should be able to say, "Hey, Webex, let's say you have a standing staff call, and you basically have your chief of staff, come up with a presentation which is allocated in a particular box environment or in a SharePoint area." You should be able to go into that meeting and say, "Hey, Webex, load the PowerPoint from last week into the presentation mode." Everything can get voice activated. You can teach skills to Webex or other technologies in order to make sure that you are automating a lot of various different elements. Again, this plays a tremendous role in terms of increasing employee productivity, as well as in the current environment helps them be safe, right? Because it's voice enabled. That's one particular area where smart technology with AI is going to be predominant. Here is another use case which we already have within our portfolio. Given that remote work is going to be here to stay, companies are going to actually expand their recruiting efforts. You no longer have to be tied to a particular geography. And so let's say you want to basically stand up a new team in a geo which is located, for example, I'm just going to throw it out there, in India or in Poland or in any other geography. And you mostly don't have a lot of English speaking speakers. Now technology can help solve that problem for you too. So you can have a WebEx meeting and you can talk in English, and it will automatically get transcribed and translated into a different language, so that two people can continue to basically have the communication happen. And this one is an amazing use case which will help contact center agents. Like, let's say, most of the contact centers were always in a particular facility. Now, if all of those contact center agents actually are to shift to home, you can hire people out of any geo speaking any different language, because the technology will do the automatic translation for you. And that can be useful for a large or a small, medium, or any kind of a company will automatically have the ability to further enable that connectedness in order to basically, help build a diverse, inclusive workforce as well. And so these are some of the small areas which I mentioned. Ultimately, technology is going to play a predominant role in order to enable the work to happen in this hybrid environment. It does not matter where you work. It's all about how you can basically continue to innovate in the future of work in this kind of a hybrid environment.
Yeah, and I think that when thinking about the role that technology can play with the connection to networks and the ability to and frankly within thought leadership, right? I think we've talked a lot about what the future of work is for office, remote, hybrid. I think one of the things that the two of us and many others are probably used to is the amount of conferences that we attend every year, right? And certainly COVID has disrupted the experiential sector in incredible ways. Virtual events, I feel like I get, there's so many of them on the Vox Media side. Obviously, Code Conference was a huge one for us, and we've been doing some really interesting things with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway with Pivot Schooled and leveraging kind of audio as a means of continuing to deliver that thought leadership. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how do we think about, is this virtual approach to conferences and experiential here to stay? Is that going to be a hybrid model moving forward? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say definitely with events, it's also going to be in a hybrid environment. You can never take away the experience you actually get with a physical event. There is no doubt on that. But having said that, there are some additional benefits you actually get with events, right? So what could they be? One is, if you're not able to attend the event because of budget, because of time constraints, and because of whatever reasons, you now have the ability to basically watch all of the sessions as long as you've registered for the event through the on-demand version of it. Right. So, the second thing is you no longer need to basically plan for the travel, get a budget from your employer in order to basically join that particular event. Third one is it gives you additional choices and flexibility. You can adopt to join whichever sessions you want. And even digital events gives you the ability to do that networking. You can create focus groups, and the technology allows you to do that. You can, given that everything is around video conferencing, you can still get to have network with the various different folks who basically come to that particular conference. And so in my mind, will virtual events be the future? Not at all. I would say that even with events, you're going to see back the physical events, because people definitely want to see the face-to-face contact. But how that is going to get delivered in a face-to-face environment is definitely going to change. And so we still need to think about how that will actually evolve in terms of an experience. But virtual events are definitely here to stay. And so there is also going to be, I would say, in terms of events, it's going to be a hybrid environment. You're going to have the face-to-face events as well as the virtual events.
Yeah, I think that is a great point, and the value is going to be increasing, I think, as users figure out how best to leverage both the in-person event versus the virtual, and frankly the efficiency that might be able to come with those particular options. 2021 is most likely going to be the year of the hybrid workforce, right? And I think that as we think about a return to the office for some, or none, or all, hybrid structures will most likely be kind of adapted rather throughout a number of different industries. Thinking about a number of years out, 2025, do you see that model holding and I'm asking you to break out your crystal ball here a little bit, but is that, what do you see kind of for a little bit more of in the distant future around different models based on the development of technology that's been pushed along as a result of this?
So the future is going to be options, choices, and flexibility, right? So we are now seeing the evolution of work. Recently, when you saw the world's most powerful CEOs testifying before Congress over WebEx, you know that future is here to stay. And that future is not going to be temporary. It's going to be all about much more of a hybrid environment. And that's where more and more companies will figure out what is going to be the balance between in-office as well as remote. If you want to basically continue in that hybrid environment, we'll have to give people choices in terms of what they want to do and how they actually go about doing it. And it's about being able to leverage technologies in order to ensure, the 3 E's, the connections, empathy, as well as empowerment. That has to be there. The cultural transformation has to be there, regardless of whether it's going to be a hybrid environment or a face-to-face environment. And technology is going to play a pivotal role in order to help employees, regardless of where they're actually going to work. That is not going to change. In my mind, whether it is in the near distant future for 2021 or even getting into 2025, companies are actually going to realize that there are going to be a lot of positive benefits as well as some negative benefits which they need to work on, which they're going to get with hybrid work. The cost of real estate in certain geos are expensive. The cost of recruiting talent in some of the geos is expensive, and it's also very difficult to find the talent. And employers are actually going to realize that, they can reduce their CapEx costs. They can also get a reduction in terms of being able to get access to a workforce which are geographically distributed if they have the ability to bring that as a part of their culture as well as leveraging the underlying technology. So in my mind, we need to be able to create equality in experiences between remote as well as hybrid workers, and companies who know how to do that, they'll get the best of benefit of both the worlds in terms of being able to operate in this hybrid environment. Because if you basically go into a hybrid environment and you have the option to basically hire a workforce which are geographically distributed, you make sure that those remote workers don't feel like they are second-class citizens. And with the technology, they don't need to feel like they are second-class citizens, right? So they'll have the option to work anywhere, anytime, and with the right cultural transformation and by adopting the right technology, they can still continue to move the work along. And ultimately, it isn't about getting back to the normal, but it's about creating a new normal, a new paradigm. And when you build a culture and use that includes remote work, you have the opportunity to shape the future of work to be better than ever. And that future of work, in my mind, is here to stay now in the near future as well, if you look forward into 2025 and even as far as 10 plus years.
Yeah. And I think you brought up some great points on hiring, recruiting, and some of that is changing along with everything else. Turning to some audience questions, the first of which really hits on that. And how can marketing and technology leaders structure their teams and recruit highly coveted talent for a new era that demands an increasing array of skill sets? It's a great question.
It doesn't matter whether it's marketing or, so some you probably have to have workers in the office, but I would say marketing is one area where you have the opportunity to hire a geographically distributed workforce. I have a team of close to 100 plus creative marketeers, and they are geographically distributed. And this was the case even before the COVID era, because within my teams, we actually use our own WebEx technology tools in order to make work happen anywhere, anytime. Like I said, if you want to brainstorm a session, I have some of my regional leaders who are located all around JC or even across all of EMEA, and we would get together and we would use our virtual whiteboard, and we would still continue to brainstorm and have those sessions in order to move work along. And so in my mind, the technology gives you the opportunity to hire the right set of talent But the key part which you need to think about is the underlying cultural transformation. If you are not in an environment where you have hired remote teams, a geographically distributed teams, important, because in my team, most of my team members are geographically distributed, and that culture was always there. And so for my team, it was very easy to actually shift into this remote culture, because there were only about 20 plus people who used to come into the office. Most of the folks used to work remotely. And so it was not easy. It was not difficult at all. But if you are going to stand up a brand new geographically distributed team, the two things which are important are the cultural element, around the 5 E's. How do you establish the trust with your underlying employees? How do you communicate? How do you basically bring a culture so that you can establish the best practices in order to move work along, so that people come along the way? And then the second part is, how do you embrace technology in order to move the work forward? Like I said, you can have a brainstorming session, you can have virtual water cooler sessions. In fact, one of the best practices we have come up with is we now have virtual trivia games. We use our technology with WebEx, with both our messaging as well as our video conferencing, and we come up with multiple different topics. We split into multiple different groups, and we compete with each other. We have a lot of fun. And so those are things which are completely possible. But again, culture and technology is going to help you absolutely, regardless whether it's marketing or engineering, product management, does not matter.
Yeah. Sticking with marketing for a second, many brands have drastically reduced their budgets or changed budgets, their strategy. One of the questions from the audience is, how has perhaps your media plan adjusted, or maybe not, you don't have to speak specifically to Cisco, but in general, what is your perception of some of the shifts that we're seeing in terms of marketing, and what is the immediate future? Our visibility into the future has been limited, right? So I think what is the next few months, or year, if we're willing to go there, hold?
I would say that my media strategy has definitely shifted quite a bit. Part of my media budget used to be out of home, in terms of being able to build out those ads in airports, billboards, various different building structures, so on and so forth. I don't have any of my media budget invested right now in out of home. Out of home is not even considered as a part of my strategy, at least for now, as well as in the near future, until people start to, travel across the board. So my big part of my media strategy has now gone into digital. It was always there on the digital side, but now I've doubled down on the digital side. And when I say digital, there is one element on the digital is around influencer marketing. I think there is a huge opportunity out there when you think about affiliate as well as influencer marketing, especially on the digital side. And so I've definitely moved a big part of my budget towards that. Another one is, how can you creatively communicate your campaign message or your thought leadership message with short video, put media budget behind that and elevate that on social, right? So that's another way which I've actually radically shifted my media strategy. And then the third one is, looking at an expensive channel, but I think that is much more relevant now, which is the broadcast channel. If you guys see CNN, you'll see brought to you by X, and we created a lot of those kind of media partnerships as well, in terms of making sure that, a lot of people, and we also have put out commercials out there on a couple of different broadcast channels, and that will continue to be a big part of our media strategy as well. So I would say, given the current environment, your media strategy mix has to shift, and in order to basically reach your particular target audience. And in my case, my target audience, everybody's actually working from home. And that's why I've adopted my media mix more towards digital media mix with social, display, and video, as well as into the broadcast channel.
Yeah, I love to hear how you're thinking about digital, and I think it's something that is, we're seeing a lot across the board. I think it's one thing just to say, okay, now I have a more robust digital strategy. It's another thing to be able to program for various platforms for the consumption habits that are native to those environments. And I think what works in social won't necessarily work in other places, and there's a lot of different variations of that within social itself. So it's great to see kind of the dynamic approach that you all and others are taking to digital. I think with that, you think about Gen Z kind of growing up with with a lot of the technology that generations before them didn't. How have you thought about, or what are your thoughts in general around kind of engaging with Gen Z overall, and then as they move into the workforce and eventually leadership positions in 20 to 30 years, what do you think that will look like, given kind of the radical changes that we're seeing today?
Gen Z let me address your question from two dimensions. One is, how can Gen Z help us in terms of our marketing efforts, right? So I would say that's where the influencer marketing program is going to be extremely important. Like if you see across the board, there is the Gen Z population, they have multiple different careers, and I myself have a dedicated budget in terms of being able to work with the Gen Z as well as the Gen Y, the millennial population in terms of the influencer marketing. The other question you asked was, how do you leverage them? This is where I would say it's really, really important in order to basically put a program in place, especially as they're entering the workforce, in order to have that mentoring sessions, in order to, couple them with some of the senior folks on your team, so that as they understand and the cultural elements with respect to the organization they actually work, as they start to build out the partnership, pairing them up with one of the senior folks within your team is definitely going to be useful, because they operate a little bit differently. I myself have two girls. I'm a mother of two girls, and both of them are Gen Z. One is in between Gen Z as well as Gen Y population, and the other one is 100% Gen Z. And the Gen Z population communicates primarily through videos as well. They were born in the social era, I would say. And so figuring out, a way in order to basically communicate with them and speak their language, I think is extremely important as well. And then bringing that as a part of your culture by pairing them up with someone who is a Gen X or even a Gen Y is absolutely critical for their own self-development, because they have some amazing creative ideas. In my mind, when you have a diverse workforce across the multiple different quad generational workforce, as well as different cultures represented, and you have the right diversity represented, that's when you can come up with an amazing creative team, which will basically bring forward some amazing ideas which you can actually take into the market.
Yeah. I think you bring up it's interesting. I have two boys, 6 and 3. And so the language that they're going to be speaking in a few years is probably unknown at this point. So it'll be interesting to see how that certainly develops. I think one that I wanted to wrap on was, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's something that, companies have been and will hopefully many more will continue to prioritize for all the right reasons. How do you see that being impacted from a hiring perspective, from a cultural perspective, as we think about kind of these blended workforces moving forward? I see opportunity personally, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
From a concept of Cisco, like Cisco is really, really big about that in terms of diversity, as well as representing all different cultures and geographies around the world. In fact, our main slogan is about being able to build an inclusive future for all. And we take that really, really seriously. And so even if you look at our leadership team, we have a good representation of both, a very, very diverse leadership team across the board, right up to our CEO's level. And that best practice is definitely established across the entire company. And even I'll give you an example, even with our recruiting efforts, we definitely make sure that we have a diverse pool. We actually look at in terms of consideration when we basically hire towards any kind of a role across the board. Skills are definitely important. those are important, but outside that, making sure that we are building towards a very strong inclusive culture is a big part of what we stand for as a company. And so diversity, inclusiveness, making sure that all geos, all cultures, all diversity is very well represented is an important part for Cisco and personally for me as well.
Nice.
And it's always been a big part of how I've actually developed myself.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and hopefully more and more folks are thinking through the same lens as Cisco there. So Aruna, thank you so much for the time today. It was a pleasure chatting. And Isabel, we'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much, Aruna. It's always great having you, and I really, really loved what you guys were saying about how it's hard for Gen Z to enter the workforce right now. It's an interesting time to have your first few jobs after college and try to meet your team members through video. So it's a bit strange, but thanks to Cisco and other technology platforms, we're able to have not just like that professional interaction with our teammates, but also a bit more of a social interaction. So it was great to hear that you guys are working on that and value that as well. So thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. So we have an amazing panel coming up. Really, really excited to introduce Amy Bixler. Amy is the Global Brand Design Leader for Gensler. We're also joined by Jennifer Kolstad, the Global Design Director for Ford Motor Company. So two amazing design leaders in our presence. And this session will be moderated by Michelle Morrison, the Head of Design Operations for Dropbox. So welcome to the stage, Amy, Jennifer, and Michelle. It's great to have all three of you. Looks like everyone's popping up. Hi.
Hey.
Awesome. Well, looks like Michelle, maybe just turn on your camera when you get a chance and we'll all be sad. Perfect.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I will be back at the end.
Cool.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jennifer and Amy.
Hi.
Hello. Morning. Well, today we're here to discuss the future of work. And there is no doubt that the decade is off to an unusual start. Health, societies, economies are requiring radical rethinking. And that is why you're here today, because we want to hear how you, as brand innovators, are thinking about these massive cultural transitions. Whether you're in Berlin or Tokyo, some of the most resilient workplaces are having to adapt and change to new contexts and new conditions. And in a moment of crisis, we're also in a moment of total innovation and rethinking the way that we work. And so we'll talk about how design can lead that transition for industries across the world and dig into how you're thinking about it at Ford and Gensler. So now that I've set it up, let me give some proper introductions. So Jennifer is the Global Design Director at Ford Motor Company, with design oversight on Ford's physical environments. Her role seeks to unify Ford's brand language across typologies through architecture and design, investigating opportunities for cultural and behavioral change, elevating design impact through internal and external to the global Ford ecosystem. With a core belief in collaboration, her mission is to ideate future state readiness for physical infrastructure of the next generation for this mobility company. And I think what's so interesting about that is she's thinking about the future. And I think there's sort of a medium state with where we are right now and where Jennifer's head is at. So I'm really excited to ask her some questions. We also have Amy with us, and Amy is the global lead at Gensler's brand design practice. And she's working with clients on brand expression within physical environments. Her work focuses on delivering exceptional brand experiences through the integration of environmental graphic design and signage with interior design and architecture, a really multidisciplinary practice. She collaborates with clients across industries to develop consumer experiences, employee experiences, and community experiences. And she views future of work as a hybridization of all three. So welcome, Amy. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for joining today. So the first question I have teeing it up to the state of the world is we're in a critical moment that is calling on us to address the immediate needs of our people while simultaneously reimagining the future. And we're having to work in very short-term and long-term time horizons. How are you as brand innovators thinking about the future of work in the light of our current situation? And Jen, I thought maybe you could take the first question.
You started with a big question. You kind of started with the question. So listen, if you're getting feedback from me, let me know, and I'll see if I can adjust. Because like all things COVID, there are other things going on in the house.
You sound great right now, Jen.
Does it sound bad?
You're good.
No, it sounds perfect.
Okay, thanks, guys. So you kind of hinted at it, Michelle, which is that we are trying to construct a realistic framework or a way to think into this. We've got our now, our near, and our far. So the now is, everything in this safety and security COVID moment. But the way that I'm constructing a team to really lean in is to target the near and the far side of the equation. At Ford, we were already thinking about future of work with our campus master plan. And then COVID came to the door. And we took a pause because, we were basically coming to end of schematic design on that. And the question was asked from Jim Hackett, who's just resigned as our CEO, have we made all of the right decisions? So we put together a think tank of international thought leaders, including anthropologists, ethnographers, neurologists, behavioral psychologists, people to really help us understand how we might behave on the back end of COVID, even when virus is not around us. I always say, what will be the residual behaviors that stay with us? What will be those that we cast away as we move forward? And what will be the conditions afforded to us as a result of COVID? And then kind of give it a rethink. So that's what we're doing right now. And we're using this as an opportunity to take the good stuff and apply it to this future context.
I think that's so powerful, and the ultimate design challenge, right? That you're looking at not just the basic needs of safety and security for people, but the very long-term needs that will transform what society looks like. Amy, how are you thinking about this at Gensler?
Well, Gensler's thinking about it similarly to Ford, where there's the now, the near, and the future. So thinking about designing solutions or strategies that consider the time horizon is definitely critical because the context changes everything. But you specifically asked, Michelle, what does brand innovation look like in the context of work? And, the way we think about that at Gensler is beyond the design of the physical space. So there's really three things. So it's about how to create engagement with and between employees. It's about, encouraging some of these new behaviors. And then the third thing is really about facilitating a new way of working. We're all at this point accustomed to what it's like to work in a virtual environment, but we've really challenged ourselves to explore some new tools as it relates to collaboration.
I love that. Just yesterday, Dropbox announced that we're going virtual first, which means that we're going to optimize for remote work, but get together when things matter most. And for those right engagements and special reasons, we'll bring people together for in-person experiences. I think that's a big bet on the future because we don't know what's going to happen. One of the constraints that the pandemic has introduced is that we have to reimagine the strategies, which you're describing as, now, near, and future. That's one time horizon. I bet there's a lot of other mental models and how you're working and thinking about these things. We're working at home. Some say we're living at work. How do you think about your audiences? Because so much is at play right now. Maybe, Amy, you want to take this first pass around, how do you prepare for the future way of working when all of the context is dynamic right now?
Sure. So, as it relates to preparing for the future of work, we have a number of audiences, right? I think while we're talking about employees mostly. Employees are also consumers, and like you said, there's this blur between home life and work life. I think, you know, Jen and I, when we were pre-chatting, we were talking about which generation we're designing for, because all of them want different things. And we both have, you know, children under 10. And so, of course, we're balancing what it's like to be a working mother at home. And of course, it also starts to put us in the head of the next generation, so beyond Gen Z to Gen Alpha. And what will our children want in the workplace? They're not even there yet. So how do we start to imagine, you know, this experience that we're having right now has to make a strong impression on them. So in the future, when they enter the workplace, what might they want? And you know, a couple things that we should get into over the course of this conversation is, you know, obviously, people are looking for purpose and meaning in their work. You see people doing a lot of thinking, making some big, bold changes right now. And people are also thinking about, how can I bring, you know, or why is diversity so important, particularly in the design field, to thinking about our future and making sure we get multiple points of view.
Yeah, so powerful. Jen, I wonder, with the think tank that you're putting together, how are you thinking about these new generations, and what can you tell us about, like, what should we know about the future? I would love to hear from you.
Well, we start with the known parameters. So here are some knowns for us. We have a lot of audience members. So, you know, if we sort of flip that, the nomenclature of that, and think about our stakeholders or our users, who are our stakeholders? We have our workforce, or our employees, who we care for very much. And we have a global workforce. So we have people all over the world with different cultural nuances or different cultural considerations to think about. We have customers. So we've got a retail audience to think about. We have community members, you know, in the context of the train station, the Michigan Central development that we're building out right now. We have the Detroit community that we need to care about deeply. So all of that sort of rolls up to this think tank in this new COVID state. This is a lot of responsibility to think through. So when we're thinking through these problems, we're asking the question, what does this new world order afford us? You know, back to the previous question. And we've categorized this as, what are our new non-negotiables? You know, like, think laterally across that group. One more fact I forgot to state. In the next 10, and this is an important one. In the next 10 years, Ford Motor Company's workforce will turn at a rate of 60%. So imagine that. Imagine all of our workforce turning over, which means we'll have a younger, more nimble, you know, new value proposition, whole workforce. We've got a new set of values to account for, to champion. Never mind that we have conceivably 5 generations all working together. So we kind of come at this as a shared value proposition. I'm sure Amy will nod at this, which is, you know, this is a first, that we've got 5 generations conceivably working together under one roof. So we have to look at this and align what are our shared values. So in this post-COVID FAR state, we ask, what are the new non-negotiables? And what we're learning so far on the outside of our think tank is that things like wellness, I mean, these are kind of simple things that we probably hinted at before, we knew before, but now we would fight for them. We would say, in a post-COVID world, we all know now the new non-negotiable. We're going to fight for that one. Everybody will believe that wholly. An idea around systemic resiliency is probably a new non-negotiable. So we're generating this kind of list of things that we believe will be present in any context, be it retail, community building, workplace, wherever, for any generation. This is our new shared value system.
Yeah, this is the ultimate human-centered design, right? Is that
yes,
we're
looking at
humanity at the center of what we're doing? Mm-hmm. So I think what's interesting about what you're describing is that you know, employees really are a super important audience to this work, and they sometimes they can even double as our consumers. When you do culture building work, you do the inner work first, and then that, you know, transpires out into the brand. They can be our biggest advocates sometimes. So what are the important things to consider when designing for new employee experiences, you know, building on the non-negotiables that you mentioned, Jen?
Do you want to take this, Amy, or do you want me to?
Oh,
I feel like we should play ping pong.
I'll frame it up because I do think, as it relates to employer brand, this is a really, really hot topic with our clients. So, I mean, the way to think about it is, you know, companies have been so focused on communicating their brand value or their value proposition to consumers that there's been a little neglect on the employee side, and so they're a little less adept at figuring out how to do that. So this is, you know, true for workers or employees at all stages. So, I mean, think about the war for talent and recruit, you know, all the way from recruitment to retention, as well as, you know, developing future leaders of our companies. So even if you segment the population of workers or employees beyond the generations, but actually where they're at in their career and the options they're considering, the brand of the employer becomes really important. So just to build on what Jen was saying related to shared values, it's an opportunity for companies to stand for something and to really talk about what those values are, so that not to make everyone carbon copies of one another, but just to be on the same page, as Jen was saying, about how we make decisions through the filter of what. So health, resiliency, whatever it may be, but really defining what those are as part of your brand.
Yeah, I see that as potentially giving people a shared purpose, which we know is the biggest motivator for smart people in the world. So I'm curious, like, how does that bridge for you, Jen, when you think about, you know, you're in a mobility company thinking about the future of many factors. What does that look like in your world?
It's really interesting, even how Ford Motor has moved into this state of mobility in the last few years. You know, thanks in part to Jim Hackett, I think the visionary leadership of Jim Hackett, now Jim Farley. So to ask the question, what does it mean to be a mobility company? We're really moving into a state of being a technology company. Like everything, it forces you to ask big questions, like, what does that mean? What position does that put you in? You know, to be a technology company, mobility company really is about bridge building, is about, you know, human connectivity again. I think in every state we are in this position, this magical position to connect people, to literally connect people. And so as we, you know, come back into our physical space, then we have that obligation to really manifest our brand in space, in the physical environment. So, you know, for us, we believe that we are in the business of human connectivity or human connections. So, you know, as we think into how are we going to harness our superpower and really be our brand, like in the context of a retail environment, that's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're talking about now, is constructing meaningful relationships and building on this thing like trust, which is, you know, a core element of our brand, and make sure that we talk about that in every piece of our physical spaces. So it's like what Amy is saying, like to do something truthful, elemental, but really authentic.
Yeah, I would love to hear how you're thinking about that in the digital context, because with the new, you know, crisis and COVID constraints, like we're having to do what you're talking about in virtual spaces. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what the virtual connection what impact the virtual connection has on our culture. It's just one layer in all of the complexity that you're navigating.
So, Amy, do you want to start, or do you want me to jump in?
Sure. You know, in many ways, of course, it's challenging to feel emotionally connected when you're not physically together. I think we all recognize that's those relationships are a little bit strange right now, having to connect virtually. But in some ways, you know, digital or virtual connection really enhances culture. And so there's a number of ways that plays out. So think about, let's think near future, you know, as we become more interested in touchless solutions for obvious reasons, our personal devices will become, you know, really, really critical to how we interact. So how can we take that to the next level and think beyond practical tools to find your way, for example, to ways to find your colleagues, or ways to find the town hall, any number of events that might be happening at your place of work that help connect you with people. So we see a real opportunity in what digital tools can do to connect us as a culture.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. Even thinking about the new signals and wayfinding that we have today, you can obviously see my eclectic style that maybe didn't translate to my office desk. And we're getting new information and signals about each other that in some ways is richer than it's ever been. And in other ways, we're missing out on some of those foundational elements of office life that we've relied on for however many generations we've been in the office. Jen, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about the virtual layer to our work, and how it applies to your space?
I have to be honest, I'm kind of two minds on this topic. So on the one hand, we addressed this one in our think tank, and we've landed on a term that we're calling phygital space. Sorry for the funny word. You all can crib it if you want, but phygital is obviously the seamless integration of physical and digital. And so, you know, the idea is that we have this total fusion of hybridized space where we've got, you know, those who are potentially in a physical space in some future state, and those who are digitally present. And so we're preparing ourselves for that new world. Right now, I think a lot about the things that we're missing. So I think we've done really well. You know, since March, let's say, I think people adapted very quickly. Those of us in creative industry, you know, flipped to platforms like Miro and others so that we could start to, you know, charrette and make innovative work like we would have physically. But there are still things that we're missing, like the physical cues that we give one another when we're establishing trust, like the way that our bodies sort of move, and you know, the way that we construct those meaningful relationships I was just talking about. We're missing that, and we'll never achieve that through our plastic screens. That said, you know, back to the other side, we have leveled out issues around hierarchy. Everybody is equal on the screen. And so, you know, you have to sort of wait for everybody to speak. There's nobody in the room who is the alpha or the person presenting to everybody else. I kind of like that. That's gone. So now we have a different kind of platform where everybody potentially has an equal voice. So this is interesting. I think there's a bit of a cultural shift happening because of this.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I wonder, like, what are the values that you think we will carry through? Because there's this virtual transition that is more inclusive and more equitable. There's new value we're driving through our brands and new values that we're having to elevate. What do you think, or what personal values do you think will change the physical landscape and culture?
Jen, you go ahead on this one.
I think we're going to take some of this with us when we come back together in the physical space. You know, we think a lot about what I'm describing, like leveling out hierarchy. But really what I'm talking about is like active and passive engagement and the way that we behave in, say, a conference room environment. This is a great example. To integration of digital or tech. If we've been running an experiment with our tech team where if we apply tech to 2 walls instead of 1 wall, which is a single point of discussion, and we invite in people who are at another location, like for us, folks in Buenos Aires or in Chennai, India or something. And then we sort of measure out their viewing angles so that they can participate equal to those present. So everybody has sort of an equal point of view and can participate equally, contribute equally. Then again, we've leveled out hierarchy. Regardless of if you're present physically or digitally, we're all equal in the room. And nobody's at essentially the pulpit anymore. Nobody's speaking at. This is good. This is a totally different state of participation. And so I think now that we're all kind of comfortable here together, like we are right now, all of us in this forum, will share with us and maybe be more encouraged to participate actively in this new state of being. This is a good thing.
I wholeheartedly agree. Amy, how is this showing up in your space?
Well, first of all, I've never thought about it the way Jen just articulated. So I'm going to think about that more. You're right. It does level the playing field in terms of inviting all voices. And there's something about the screen connection that doesn't make you defer to the head in the room. So super interesting as it relates to equalizing, our workforce. I was thinking of something totally different related to this question in terms of maybe one way to think about it is we've been living in, and maybe we can go back 10, 20 years, what I think of as, an age of abundance. Mm-hmm. And now that our context is changing, I'm thinking about this as an age of smart choices. So when we have unlimited resources, when we've learned that time is finite and that we want to use our time wisely, it's just forced a lot of us to really think about how do we scrutinize ourselves and each other around making smarter choices for individuals, for the world. And so I think as it relates to values transformation, that's what's standing out to me right now.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So I think I have one more big question for you, and then I'd love to move from, the big keynote ideas to some of the more tactical stuff with our Q&A. But the last big question I'll ask you is, what should brands actively be doing today to set up this new future? This purpose-driven, equitable future that we're describing. Jen, do you want to go first?
Well, I'll tell you what I have learned this year so far. Like so far, it's not done yet. God help us. We actually have a couple more months of 2020 to go. So what I have learned so far is to construct a thoughtful framework. And this is really what I would wish to share with my colleagues, is to just slow down and thoughtfully lean into these problems. When I say problems, I really mean challenges. These are really big questions that have been put upon us this year. Like COVID is one. Of work obviously comes with that, but this moment of social justice, which is very critical, which actually layers onto this because it really becomes an issue of social emotional safety altogether. But I have learned that the pressure is to act quickly and provide an answer. What's the answer? What do the metrics say? What does the data say? And the temptation is to answer. Well, the data says this. Here's the answer. That is not the answer, actually. The answer is to slow down and formulate a response using, the thought leaders or the resources around you. And that's not necessarily the popular response, so that takes courage. But that's what I'd say. Slow down and, sort of find your voice as a brand and, reconcile your answer uniquely and then lean into the problem.
the probably highest pressure and most exciting design problem to have, right? Which is
Yes.
we're getting to define the future in a way that we don't have a playbook for. And so in this moment, our brand innovators really are going to shift the narrative and the way that we do our work, which I think is a lot to do and a lot to take on, but also just endless opportunity for us as creative people. Amy, what's your thought? I know you care so much about belief systems, and I think that is a major theme in what we're talking about today. Tell us what people should be doing to get ready for the new future.
Sure. I mean, I'm talking with a lot of brands, and they're asking for that playbook, like you said, that doesn't exist because none of us have done this before, so it's all speculative. But one thing that you can do is, I say, dust off your manifestos and really roll up your sleeves and think about what you stand for, because there could be things that we want to leave behind, pre-COVID. So really looking at that value system, evaluating what you want to bring with you into the future. The time is now. We're never going to get this time back. We all know that. So that giving your work meaning and purpose, as well as making sure that drives your brand and your brand value proposition, and that it's clear to everyone, is so critical.
Yeah, I love the way that you have this duality in your sort of mental model around this work, that you have to do it, make it real internally first, and then push it out through the brand. And I think that's when you really do get work that reinforces your beliefs, and then it becomes very true for people who interact with your brand. Yeah. So we have some really great questions from the audience, and if you're in the audience, please submit your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll ask them as they come up. But I think we're going to shift the conversation a little bit more into the tactics and some of the real life brand innovator work that we're seeing today. The first question comes from Isabel, and she asks, how does your marketing differ for reach out of the under 30 consumers entering the workforce? Jen, I think you described it really eloquently with a 5-generation workforce. What does that look like for you right now?
It's sort of what I was talking about before. For our under 35 workforce, I mean, we're identifying priorities, full stop. So, as we're designing our new campus, we're consciously ensuring that we're building into it, a new model of working. Assuming that this is in the FAR framework, without applying the findings of our think tank just yet. So stay tuned on that. But, we had already thought through a fitness model. We had, even starting with the external landscape, we had committed to a restorative model for the landscape master plan, which was actually taking the landscape back to its original ecological footprint, and, laying down footpaths, for outdoor activity and walking meetings and little pavilions placed out in the landscape. This is like a totally different way of working for Ford Motor Company, but, we were consciously thinking about a younger workforce and the ways in which they would, want to come to us in Dearborn, Michigan. What would be appealing? What would keep them with us? So I would say a radical shift for Ford Motor Company, and really beautiful, very sustainably focused.
I think that's so powerful. And I think what we're hearing is that the new value set that younger generations bring into the workforce actually motivate us to invest in completely different spaces than we would have invested in before.
Yes. Yeah, well said. Thank you, Michelle.
Amy, what do you think? I feel like at Gunzo you can view into other cultures and the companies that you work with and help transform through employee engagement and internal programming. What are you seeing for a younger generation of workers, and what are they needing from you?
Let's see, we talked about this a little bit, but if I may, it's so bold to say that I do think there are the generation before us. There might be a bias towards moving quickly, taking action, decisiveness. And so to Jen's point about it's going to take courage to do the opposite, which is say, pause, think about what's happening here. Let's evaluate, a few points of view before decisive action. I think that's going to be really critical to our future leaders too, to be able to demonstrate that they're listening and they're learning and they're taking in multiple inputs. I think that's what our future leader looks like.
Thinking about just us working in design and some of the truisms that we hear, I think we're going from, based on what you're saying, a more is more model to a less is more model potentially as we make the shift. And hopefully that inspires some really innovative thinking for what's to come. The next question asks, what effect do you think the Gen Z generation will have on corporations and brands as they move into leadership in the next 20 to 30 years? We're seeing new values. What do you think those values will sort of transform when this generation is in a position of leadership? Or what do you hope to see?
I sort of already answered that one. Jen, do you have another point of view?
I mean, the obvious answer is that this is a huge cultural shift. So let's just look statistically at the inevitable. We're hoping that there'll be a major, shift in equity and diversity. So let's hope that, the C-suite start to look a little bit more like our population. That's my hope. Anyway, I'm going to fight for that. That we see more women, that we see more, just diversity across the board. So, and that will inevitably bring perspective. And so, our corporations are going to look, feel, act very different generationally as we move through this. And that's just simple statistics. So I look forward to it. This was not the case for us when we started working even 25 years ago. This was, I even think back to just being a woman, in corporate industry and how difficult it was at the beginning. And I'm hoping that is something we don't talk about anymore. I'm very excited for Gen Z and Gen Alpha to start to grow up inside of this system.
Same here. I couldn't agree.
I can't wait to pass the torch.
I can't agree with you more. I lead the Women in Design group at Dropbox, and right now we're a group of people who are pushing on all boundaries to make sure that today, in the next round of reviews, we're equitable for everyone. And then the next set of hires, that we have more underrepresented minorities and women applying for these jobs. And it takes a very tactical and strategic approach to do that today, with the intention that, like you say, we hope to not have to argue about it in the future. And it's very meaningful work that will we'll be so much more creative with more people in the room. The next question is pretty specific about the tactics of our work. It asks, many brands have drastically reduced media budgets over the past few months. How have your media plans adjusted? And what are you thinking about in the very short term around this?
Yeah, so neither of us really do media buying. At least I don't think you do media buying, but we do work with either clients or partners in marketing communications who are making decisions about their budgets. So I think we all saw that, April to June timeframe, something like that, everyone constricted and pulled back. But now that things are loosening up a little bit more, it's more about trade-offs, less that the budget's down overall and more prioritizing where to spend the marketing dollars. So less an answer related to media plan and more just marketing communications budgets at large.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The next question builds on this a little bit, but it gets back to the culture in some ways. They're asking if we're seeing any behavioral changes with, being at home, social distancing with our brands. How are we seeing people engage with our brands differently right now? I think we've talked a lot about kind of reforming the brand or pushing the brand forward, but what kind of response are you seeing?
In terms of how people are engaging with brands?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, there's so many examples. I think, and because I work in brand development, it's easier to think this way than this way, right? Which is that I think everyone is looking for that silver lining, meaning that optimism goes a long way. And so we're trying to take, a series of very challenging events and turn them into opportunity. I think that's the biggest thing. So whatever way the conversation is going, that's what brands and consumers want to talk about is how do we see the positive in all of this and how do we change for the better?
I think that's totally right. Even at Dropbox, we haven't been called on to comment on social justice movements before, but it was really important for us as a company to put a stake in the ground in what we believed in. And as a brand, we had to figure out how do we say that as the Dropbox voice. And one of the big things that really helped our team show up in the right way in that moment was that across the company and within, including the CEO, we collectively donated $2 million to Black Lives Matter. And if you asked me 3 years ago, would this be part of your brand strategy? No, definitely not. But in the moment of need, we were able to sort of motivate and orient ourselves to what we believed in, going back to those belief structures that you've both talked about, and say yes in the moment where it was obvious that we needed to say yes. And so I think that there is a lot of interplay with society and brand, more so than ever before, and it's far beyond consumption. It's going back to what you're talking about around belief systems.
Yeah, a lot of volunteerism. And I don't want to take it to activism, but just participation. People want to be part of the conversation and do something, or even if they don't do something, they want to listen and participate and engage. It's had a lot of positive impact.
That's right. Next question asks, how can marketing and technology leaders structure their teams and recruit highly coveted talent for a new era that demands increasing array of skill sets? So Amy, maybe you take this, and Jen, I would love to hear what the think tank is thinking about it, but there's a new dynamic workforce. So how should we, apply that to our internal org design or internal strategies?
Oh, team structure. I think about this a lot in terms of what makes great teams. Really fortunate, at least in my role in practice at Gensler, that I get to work with, 20 different teams at once, and the makeup of the teams are very different. So it's operationally challenging. Think of the calendar alone and how many work hours we have in the week and how to make all those people's calendars line up. But the diversity of the teaming really creates exceptional results, because it's less about doing what you did last time that worked well, and it's less about efficiency and more about creation. So just making sure we have a thinker in the mix. I mean, there's all different types of designers at Gensler, so multidisciplinary, I would say, is definitely a huge theme. And then as it relates to, I think the specific question was around recruitment of coveted talent. I mean, sure, now's the time, because people are evaluating just satisfaction in their current role. It's a great time to have conversations with multiple organizations, whether that's recruiting talent or just partnering together to do something exceptional.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Jen, how are you thinking about like org design and talent strategy maybe in the near or even the future? What's your take on it? I'm curious to hear.
I love this question. It's a good question. And actually, my answer is something that I'd put in that new non-negotiable column that I mentioned earlier on in our conversation. So in our think tank, we had Tim Brown, who's from IDEO. I'm sure you all know who he is. And we spoke with him about this idea of coalition building a lot. And so the idea of a coalition, or we'll say movement of the idea of a collaborative team into a coalition, became a pervasive theme. So we believe that we're now in this broadened state of coalition building. This is important because it's really about a total exchange of information, or relinquishing control of information, and inviting in external agency. So inviting in others, cultural change moment. I mean, this is kind of a big deal, right? Now you're opening the doors and letting others into your space. And there's a free flow of information. Like Amy has just stated, with the target of solving the bigger problem collectively for the greater good. So I think in this future state, we really are looking for people who have a willingness to participate in this idea around the coalition, which is like active participation and a willingness to kind of free flow, amongst teams. And the people who participate are not kind of like the usual suspects. I mean, you heard me talk about anthropologists and sociologists and medical professionals and others. Well, look at our BLM moment, we've got community builders that need to come in and help us learn. We have others that just need to lead us through. So this is, I'd say, a radical shift in team building.
Yeah. I see it and feel it, and I wish I were in some of those rooms that you're in with all of the multidisciplinary thinkers, because I think we're all asking ourselves these questions right now, and the more diversity of thought and input we can get, the better we can orient ourselves towards a smarter future.
Yes.
This next question kind of builds on what you're saying, Jen, and the question sets it up that there are 5 generations in the workplace and everybody learns differently. You're describing this context where we're going to work differently. How do we help people transition, or how do we teach them to work in the new ways as we go through this massive cultural shift? Where does learning and development or training reinforce some of those things that you're talking about?
I'm glad you asked that question too. So this is a personal answer now. I actually think that we need to be working with our educational institutions, kind of go as far upstream as possible to start building core curriculum in design schools, whatever that design curriculum is, and start teaching, things like business, but problem solving, design thinking in this new way, so that our students are prepared to jump in. And that's what we're doing.
I totally agree. And I know that I'm a minute over. So Amy, if you have any closing thoughts on this, I'd love to wrap up with you.
Well, I'm playing with a yellow crayon here on the side. I was trying to grab a highlighter, and then I thought, oh, this is an innovation, meaning this is a time to grab whatever tool you can and think about how to innovate and not just fall back on learned behaviors. It's a really exciting time. So thanks for tuning in.
Jennifer, Amy, you're both so brilliant, and I can't wait to see the impact that your thinking has on the future of work. Thanks for the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you to all 3 of you. It was really great also hearing all the things Dropbox is doing. Of course, as we use Dropbox very often at Brand Innovators, but also, of course, Gensler and Ford. So thank you so much, Amy and Jennifer and Michelle, for joining us today. It was really awesome conversation. Hope to see you back soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
A quick reminder to all of our audience members that we have 2 amazing sessions still left today. So make sure to send today's link to family and friends or colleagues, and they can join in and watch. So for our next session of the day, I'm super excited to welcome the founder and CEO of Industrious, Jamie Hodari. And congratulations also to Industrious for recently making Inc. 500's list of fastest growing companies. That is really, really exciting. And this session will actually be moderated by my mom, Benji Baer, the global CMO of CBRE. So also welcome Benji to the stage. Hi, Jamie. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. Great.
In the classic mother-daughter fashion, my mother has tech issues and was texting me how to fix them. So she'll be joining in just a second. Where are you in an Industrious office right now?
I didn't plan this, but I happen to live 1 block from our Prospect Heights location. So
that's amazing then. So then you get to use that space. How many? Actually, I'm just curious. How many offices do you guys have right now?
we like more than 100.
Okay.
We're in 50-something cities.
You're everywhere.
I think we have 7.
Okay, that's really exciting. All right, well, it looks like Benji's on. I was just making fun of you at the same time, Mom.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Jamie, how you doing?
All right, well, I'll be back. I'll hand it over to you 2, and I'll be back with you.
I'm having some internet issues. Jamie, I'll do my best. So just, I don't know what's going on.
Looks like you're coming in clear, so just keep doing what you're doing.
Sounds
If it
good.
breaks up, I'll try to predict what you would have asked and
Right.
then,
Yeah,
play
no,
both sides of the conversation. All right.
You're getting the full group here.
I'm in Industrious in Brooklyn. It's like I was saying, it's like a block from my house, so it's so convenient.
Thank you, Isabel, for the intro. Super excited to be here today with a really special partner in many ways. Partner, Jamie, if that's okay. With change and adaptability accelerating like never before. We're really lucky to have Jamie Hodari, who's of Industrious. We're uniquely fortunate to have you, and I think our conversation, because of your broad role and the fact that you founded this company, is really going to be wide-ranging. We're going to have an open discussion today that we're going to be uncovering some insights from Jamie around what is it like to build a company from the ground up, creating what is now truly an iconic premium brand in the flex office space, and talking about the future of work. So I'm not sure if people can hear me. I'm a little concerned that I'm frozen. So I'm going to stop.
Benji, you're fine. Your video is just cutting in and out, but your audio is clear. So just keep going.
Perfect. So Jamie, why don't we kick things off? Really starting, I'd say from the beginning, not your full child. And how did you come about?
Okay. It broke up a little. But
Here, I'm jumping back in quickly. Just Benji, we're gonna have you just dial in if that's all right. Sorry about that, guys. We'll just do a connection this way. So if you go to the bottom right, Benji, if you go to the switch, the 3 dots. Sorry, we're doing a live tech tutorial, everyone. I'm so sorry. I'm sure I have many siblings on there. Here, we're going to resolve this a bit on the back end quickly.
Well, it sounds like the question was, how'd you launch the company? So it's your choice. I can answer that now, or do you want me to wait? Okay. So I know, I know, Benji, you said we don't need to hear about your childhood, but it is worth noting that I launched Industrious with my childhood next door neighbor. Like truly nice, you know, basically our windows looked right into their windows. We since we were 2 years old, we grew up next door to each other. And at the time we launched the business, he was working in real estate and I was actually running an education organization that ran essentially, or still runs, hybrid, half online, half offline universities in East Africa. And our largest funder was IKEA, the furniture company, the IKEA Foundation. And I had a meeting with their president. Our US offices, the bulk of the staff was in East Africa, so the US offices were quite small. So we were in a shared workplace. And I went to prepare for the meeting, and the light bulbs are out and the conference room table is sticky, and it just didn't work. It was like, it wasn't professional enough. So I actually moved the meeting to a Le Pen Quotidien, this like coffee shop nearby. And I think that evening I was just stewing. I was, livid, because it was the most important meeting of my life. I was paying for office space, and it didn't meet the sort of standard of, and I think pretty reasonable standard of professionalism or elegance, where I could hold the meeting there. So I was using a coffee shop despite the fact that I was paying for an office. And I think for me, it very much felt like there are advantages to, shared office, and below a certain team size, it's just so clear that's the right option. And if I want to take advantage of that, but would need something more professional that was a better fit for our organization, there must be 50,000 companies that feel similarly. And Justin, my next door neighbor from growing up and best friend, had similar experiences with his shared workplace that he was using. And so we said, you know what, this is just that classic entrepreneurial, I'd be customer number one for this product. So we launched it. And it was a total side project. We both had full-time jobs. And even for the first 7 cities we did, we were trying to also have our day jobs. And eventually it was growing so quickly, we had to move over to running Industrious full-time. And that was 6 years ago at this point. Are we back on audio-wise? Okay. Well,
we're working. I have no idea now what the issue is. I do know. Benji, are you unmuted? Let's see. I'm getting a message.
Well, I will keep going then.
We
while
can
we
keep
wait
going.
for that.
I
Okay.
look like her. We can fill in.
Okay.
Well, it's really cool that you started at Le Pen. That's at least a place you can get good food there. I'm curious, like I know you guys were just listed obviously on Inc. 500's fastest growing company. Like, when did this like exponential growth happen? I know you said you have over 100 companies. Like, how did that? I guess when on the timeline, when did that happen?
So we've been growing. So let's say revenue growth. We've been growing for over 100% a year for a long time now. So I think this would be our 6th year of over 100% compounded revenue growth. So very early on, since probably year 1 of the business. Now, it's hard for a business to grow at over 100% a year in perpetuity. Like for me now, we're the size business where I think we could continue to, but my sense is the growth of the business will stabilize more at something like 50 to 60% a year revenue growth, which is still puts a lot of pressure on a business. But for reasons we can get into, it is an industry where there's just a lot of growing demand right now. I think I'm biased, but I think we're the best at what we do. And so it's hard to get off that hyper growth kind of treadmill in a certain way, because in certain ways the market is demanding it. And And so, and I think, our business model is we don't sign leases with landlords. We do management agreements where the landlord puts up the majority of the capital and really we get a fee in exchange for running it. So it's a pretty risk mitigated business. So the other thing is you look at a lot of hyper growth businesses right now, and the premise is like, we're going to hemorrhage money and one day we're going to figure out how to make money. And I certainly think the market is thankfully eventually, turning against that particular way of running a business, but that's not really the Industrious MO. So I don't know. I suspect we're going to keep up that very high growth rate for a while to come.
Yeah.
COVID notwithstanding.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the COVID stuff. I'll let Benji do that. She's coming back. But one more question I'm really curious about, someone like entering the workforce newly, what is your target demographic when it comes to your workspaces? Is it everyone, or like who, what age group, I guess, in demos are using flex workspaces these days?
So, to zoom our position, this is an outsourcing industry. You're going to companies and you're saying this thing that for the last 50 years you did yourself, the delivery of your employees' workplace experience, is something you should be buying as a product from us. And that particular value prop, I wouldn't say is concentrated in any particular company type, vintage, et cetera. So we have an enormous number of large enterprise businesses. We have a lot of mid-sized PR firms, and we do have some solo entrepreneurs. We're the premium provider in our market, and that extends to pricing. And so we're probably weak compared to our competitors at serving the very early stage startup market. I would love to. This is not about wanting to run away from that segment. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I wish that we are able to serve more. Like, we started the business 3 weeks ago and we're going to take over the world. But it probably would be imprudent if that was your company to go, use the sort of premium workplace as a service provider. And so as a result, I will say, the average age of an Industrious customer is, I think, 37 or 38. The average vintage of an Industrious kind of company is 13 years, and the average size skews large relative to the rest of the industry. Mm-hmm. And that's that. We're not a luxury product. It's not a Bentley or a Rolls Royce, but it is kind of like an Audi or it's a premium product where you pay a little bit more, but there's a justification for that. But there are oftentimes demographic and sort of customer decisions that get made for you when you decide to play in that segment of the market.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Thanks for bearing with me. Handing it back over, Mom, Benji. Thanks.
I'm going to do my best. Jamie. Sorry about that. I had some serious.
No.
My house must need an upgrade on internet. I don't think I've
been on a panel since COVID started where there wasn't something like this, and so this one feels mild in certain ways.
Yes, I would agree with you. I'd agree. So I don't know if you got to this before with Isabel, but you did envision the brand, you did envision the value proposition. I think you are sort of wearing a dual hat as CMO. This is a brand and marketing organization. Would love to get your perspective on how you thought about the brand, how you went about building it, and then what sort of marketing strategy you have in place now and that you think's been successful, and how did you sort of evolve and modulate that over time?
So I never thought about myself that way, but I think it is true when you're growing business, certainly much farther into the growth trajectory of the business than I would have imagined. You're right. You don't have a CMO, and you don't have usually a chief product officer either. The CEO, the founder, is meant to define the value prop, the product, the brand, how they all fit together. And there are disadvantages, which is that I was a corporate lawyer and I worked at a hedge fund and then I worked in education. I am not a marketer in heart, nor do I there are real product people that have been, PMs for 15 years, and they have like a really clear sense of the product iteration process and stuff. On the other hand, I think what's really nice about being CEO of a growing business is you're able to integrate all of those pieces more, because you're not doing marketing, qua marketing as something separate from the rest. you have this through line through, product, value prop, the way that the brand is positioned. And for me, probably the couple things that I've had to do is, when you're a younger business, you don't have a lot of data. You don't get to do focus groups. So you do have to go with your gut a bit more. I think you have to, talk to your customers. You have to stay close to what they want. But you really do have to say, I think this is where the hole is in the market. I think this is what people are going to respond to. And we just have to make a bet and cross our fingers and hope that we're not totally wrong about this. Because if we are, we could lose our shirts, and we have no way to get the data necessary to actually validate that's right before we put it out there. And for better or worse, that brand at Industrious, it's evolved over time, but for a very long time was focused around essentially being warm and welcoming and a place where everyone could work and everyone could feel productive in this very modern sense about, not doing the most work, but doing your best work. And we got lucky, and it really did resonate, I think, from the very early days, in part because we have this very big, very bad competitor that we were able to at least see where their messaging wasn't landing. And that little sort of piece of information, I think, did help.
That's great. That's great intel. So really, like a fast follower strategy seems to have done well for you. Sort of in the same realm of thinking about the marketing mix, there's obviously, because of the behemoth in the co-working space and some of the perception and reputational challenges, just wondering how you sort of address that. How do you educate the market around the benefits and the pros and the cons of co-working? And I know you've initiated a workplace operator council. I just thought it'd be really interesting to share that concept, which I thought was, super smart, to bring like-minded people together and all in service of the kind of greater good. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, as really I consider that a marketing strategy in many respects.
Okay, so I would start by saying, I think it's fair to say that our industry, in certain ways, there are some perception issues. You kind of have to say, okay, for better or worse, you have this very large, very loud player in the sector, and they're going to define a lot of people's first view of what it is and isn't. And for us, what that's meant from a messaging point of view is, I think most industries like ours, when they really take off, it's when you go and say, it's not that we can do this faster than you can, or cheaper than you can, or more flexibly than you can. It's we can do this better than you can. And I think because that has very much not been the message in our industry, because you're not just having to go into the market and say we're great at what we do, but you're having to also overcome incoming sort of hypotheses on the part of your customers that this is a quick and dirty way to, if you need a couple desks in a city, I think we've had to over sort of index on, or lean more heavily than we otherwise would, on quality and on saying this is about getting a better workplace experience for your employees. And you can measure your employee engagement and you can measure your employee attrition rates. But I think in general, we've had to say, this is how you'll know when our product is succeeding, and to really stand behind that earlier in the life of the business and more comprehensively or persuasively than we would have had to if we didn't have competitors or things that were pulling market perception in more of a either trend or kind of like, cost-based direction. The workplace council you mentioned is, when COVID started, one downside of our industry is, mature industries, they have, it's very clear what are the metrics that matter. And, Marriott's going to speak on behalf of the hospitality industry, and CBRE is going to speak on behalf of the real estate services industry. And there's no one to speak on behalf of our industry. There's no coordination. There's no general perception of what's going on, what isn't. And so I think I really felt like, for all the bad things about the moment at hand, here was an opportunity to reach out to all of our competitors globally, the kind of 20, and say, let's join together. Let's put out a document that shows how to, run a workplace safely, but also use that as the entry point to say, what would it look like for all the operators in the industry to have a unified voice and figure out what it looks like to start coordinating on messaging. And to your point, there is a marketing component to that. And I think it turned out to be pretty effective. I'm glad we did it. And probably it was a year or two too late.
Interesting. So COVID was kind of your catalyst in this case, but the value of uniting together probably could have yielded some benefits earlier. I
think you have to have the confidence. You have to have the confidence to call up all your competitors and say, hey, are you up for this? And everyone's going to know Industrious put it together. So that's like, you might not like that, but I think there are going to be advantages. And it kind of like, I wish I had had the confidence to do that a couple years ago, because I think people were excited about it. And I think we're a big enough business and have a strong enough reputation that we merited being able to play that role in our industry.
Yep. And so kind of a related segue to that, and I applaud you for doing that, because I think it set the right tone that you want to see, particularly given the circumstances we were all navigating through. And, I didn't get to say this at the beginning, it's sort of obvious, but real estate, office space is one of those industries in the crosshairs of obviously the pandemic directly impacted. So we've both been thinking and spending an awful lot of time considering what the future of the office is, right? Hypotheses, we've all done our data and research and trying to anticipate, uncertainty and amongst the unknown. There's a lot of question marks, but I think there are some truths about people and humans that I think are going to take us through this in a positive way. Would love to hear from your perspective. And obviously, Seabury and we have a view on this, and we're starting to see it play out already. But how has Industrious really adapted the offering during the pandemic? And how do you see that sort of playing out in the maybe more the medium to long term as COVID hopefully, rescinds and is less of a factor?
So I will say, we've talked to 5,000 customers since COVID started. So I obviously, to that earlier point, you have to have a point of view. You have to have a gut about where things are going. But at this point, it is helpful to be in deep conversations with all your customers about them explicitly saying what they want and what they're trying to do. And I think the patterns are starting to become very, very, very clear. Almost every company you talk to, mid-size, large, small business, et cetera, but particularly mid-size and large, I think there is a shift towards saying we want to give employees the choice of where to work and when. People are not going to come to the office 5 days a week anymore, but they are going to come 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week, probably 2 or 3 days a week. And there's going to be less and less willingness on the part of employees to sit in the same chair 10 hours a day in a big open floor plan pit and have to do all the types of work they do, writing an investment memo, phone calls, quick emails, deep thought emails, all sitting in the same physical space with the same distractions, et cetera. And so I think the core themes are more employee empowerment and a more distributed way of working. And I mean that both in the broadest sense, that instead of 70% of headcount working at headquarters, you might have 40 or 30% of headcount working at headquarters, and more regional offices and more offices in Asheville, North Carolina, or Missoula. And also within a metro area, instead of having one downtown LA office. And if you happen to live in Orange County, tough having a distribution of offices within a metro area. And then for an individual employee, having a distributed workplace experience. So you're working from home sometimes, from the office sometimes. When you're in the office, you're at your desk when you're working on an Excel model, but you're moving to focus rooms when you have to work in deep focus. You're working in brainstorming rooms when you have to sort of brainstorm. And because people are not going to be at the office 5 days a week, and so you're going to see average office utilization go from 60% to 35%, that means instead of having to have this one-size-fits-all giant open floor plan workplace, you're going to be able to have more diversity of spaces and have employees move throughout all of those. As far as what that means for us, the biggest distinction is, for the very first time, we put out a subscription model we've been thinking about for years that we thought was a little too quirky and a little too progressive, because real estate's a very conservative industry. And what that was a utilization-based subscription for the office, just like, Zipcar or
Yep.
Amazon Web Service or anything else. You're going to say, I'm going to go to the office twice a week, and I'm going to sign up at the beginning of the week which days I'm going to go in, and there's going to be a private office waiting for me those days. And if I end up going 3 or 4, I'm going to pay overages, essentially. That's a very different way to consume real estate, and it's growing for us right now at 20% week over week. So it's like by far the fastest growing subscription type for us. And so as quirky as it is, I think it is the right thing for the moment.
Mm-hmm. And for now, I'm wondering from a corporate perspective, how do business leaders feel about that over the long term? Having, you have a lot less, quote, control over your workforce and actually doing the calculus of figuring out like what is headquarters, what is not headquarters, and doing the math is not a small feat. And then I'll add a third point and just want your thoughts around this. And then third point, as you describe kind of the long tail future of work, the implications for residential real estate and even, population density and where people end up spending time, it's pretty profound if you were to map that out over, say, 5 years to a decade. And that gets out of the just our, immediate world, but it's kind of an interesting idea.
To the first point, this business is what it is. And I think a lot of growing businesses, particularly disruptive businesses, lose their way when they try to be something for everyone and they try to pretend that certain limitations on their business don't exist. So what we do is provide a productized workplace experience, but it means it's productized. It means you are taking something that was traditionally done in a very ground up, rip the building to the studs and build it from scratch because that's what Bank of America offices should look like, and you're turning into a product. And that has all of the advantages of anything that's productized. That has all the advantages of getting to consume something as a product and service, but it has the downside of the fact that it is productized. It does mean it's closer to Starbucks than when I hand brew my own cup of coffee with my own mix of beans that I made, and you have to be okay with that. And I think to your point, it does mean the company has less control over the branding, over the workplace experience. And for any product, I think the way you overcome that is you say, great, look at the numbers. If your employees, for the most part, if you try this out in 2 markets, and 80% of your employees say, I liked it more when I was in Bank of America controlled space. I liked it more when IBM created and around the offices. Well, then that's a sign that this is an inferior option and you should use it sparingly when you absolutely have to. But if 80% of your employees say, actually, we prefer this, then okay, yes, you did lose some control. But if your employees are preferring it, then what was that control? You now use, let's say, you used to build your own CMS or something, and now you use Salesforce. That means you lost control. But if your employees prefer using Salesforce in the internal Pfizer, CMS, then what are you solving by continuing to use the internal version? I think that's the argument.
Yep. No, it's an interesting, it'll be interesting to see as it evolves, but I think, as you said, companies are getting more comfortable. I think it also has tangential implications for talent evaluation and culture. And I'm sure culture is a big topic that you think about, and if I come to Industrious, I mentioned, I feel like I'm in an Industrious culture. Are you white labeling some of your products? I'm not sure we touched on that quite yet.
The way it would feel is for let's say a team of 50, there would be a suite with its own entrance and its own spaces, and it would look and feel like Ernst & Young offices. Again, it wouldn't be as customized as if Ernst & Young had built it from scratch, but it would be Ernst & Young space. It would be identifiable as that. It would be, the difference would be, if you think about the average 50-person office, what do you have? You have a bunch of desks, you have 2 conference rooms, and you have a phone room.
Yep.
This would be a 50-person office integrated into a 100,000 square foot complex of different things. So you might spend half your day within the Ernst & Young controlled space that does feel like Ernst & Young. But if you want to get away from your colleagues, if you want to you're able to exit that and enter, you know, a workplace resort, for lack of a better word, with 50 focus rooms and 70 different conference rooms and things like that. And so it does involve kind of moving back and forth between branded private space and more unbranded shared space. But if you think about it, that's always been true of a building. I mean, unless it's the corporate campus, most companies share the lobby of a building with other companies. They share the elevator. So there's always been some calibration of what can be private and what can be shared at a building level. There's just a recalibration going on.
Great. No, it's very interesting insights, for sure. And just on the topic of sort of insights in yourself and productivity, because that kind of connects into what we were just talking about in this new environment. I'd like to know personally, you have an interesting work style, I think. And my guess is that may have maybe that has influenced the products that you've developed, maybe it hasn't. But could you chat a little bit about your nighttime huddles and how you approach work and how you organize your own time? And maybe that's again says something about the freedom and choice that kind of this future that you're defining could provide other people.
I never thought about that through line before of kind of like, if you have quirky productivity needs, does that make you as the CEO of a sort of productivity expert? But it is true. Like, first off, I'm a night owl. So I always work, for certain types of writing, I really can't do it other than between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. And
wow. I
just got married, and I'm sure we're gonna have kids soon. And I think that's probably gonna throw all this into disarray. But I think, but that is true. And I think what that means is I think I've been and also I really can't get 40% of the type of work I have to do done in a traditional office setting. I can't write, I can't brainstorm when there's 100 other people in the room. And so I think that has given me a very clear window into the fact that different people work different ways. And what happens is a lot of people don't totally acknowledge that to themselves. They come home and some days they were on top of the world and they got twice as much done as they thought they were going to get done. And other days they checked all the boxes, they worked for 9 hours and nothing quite came together. Everything was subpar and it felt like one of those days. But what people aren't great at is saying, well, what was the distinction between those 2 days? What was happening environmentally? What was happening that for some reason that day I was on top of the world and that day I barely got anything done? And recognizing that and sort of using myself as a guinea pig, I think has helpful in trying to say what we can offer customers is a bit of insight into that and a bit of help in saying, you, the individual, this is the type of work you do. Are you doing high cognitive work or low cognitive work, interactive work or independent work? And you can help people map out, what types of environments and what ways to structure their day will help make that work. But 99% of white collar workers have no one at their side helping them to do that. And that's one of the great advantages of kind of a business like us.
Yeah. So Jamie, your innovation, your interesting and new ways of thinking about work, I think are going to have implications both for those who participate with Industrious and even if you don't. So you are kind of the ultimate brand innovator as we're, having this discussion today. I believe, Isabel, we have a number of questions that we might want to turn to the Q&A now, if that makes sense. I'm calling, I think that was, I don't know if you'd like me to have one more question for Jamie, if you want to turn it over to the question session. I'm going to take that as a yes. All right, let's see. I have a whole bunch of questions in my inbox. So Jamie, you ready? Working from home and distancing have altered consumer media and digital habits in many ways. What are you seeing when it comes to those types of behavioral changes and how are they adapting?
So, this is where, I have to be an amateur CMO, but if not, I think this might not answer that question head on, but I think the biggest thing we're noticing in terms of consumer media and digital habits is people knew how their life worked 9 months ago. And so it was easy to run an Instagram ad or a TV ad or something. And you kind of said, this is your life and this is, and we're this, you know, we're this kind of car for this kind of person. And basically so often with marketing, you know, people already have this kind of structure in their lives of like, oh, it's like the BMW of cannabis beverages. Oh, it's like the Herman Miller chair of, and I think as all of that has gotten blown up a little bit and people feel a little bit unmoored, I think when people are consuming media, what we found is they need a lot more hand-holding. You know, so instead of like, to make it concrete, instead of for us running an ad that says, you know, you deserve your most productive workplace, you deserve your most productive day at work, industrious. It's just too mushy. It's not, for the moment at hand, it's not concrete enough. You need to say to people, evidence shows that the average white collar worker feels more, you know, less stressed and more productive if they go twice a week to a private office that they can shut the door and call their own. And it's longer and it's more boring and it's more mundane in a certain way, but that concreteness and hand-holdingness, I think, is kind of what consumers need right now. The broad thematic stuff that forces them to connect the dots. Yeah. People don't have the framework to connect those dots right now.
So that actually segues nicely to the next question. Many brands have reduced media budgets over the past few months. How have you leaned in or leaned out? And how has that mix maybe changed because of the environment we're managing through right now?
We're spending more than pre-COVID. In another version of the world, I wish we weren't, but we are spending more than pre-COVID. I do think, like, for better or worse, people underestimate what our industry looks like right now. Or I can't speak for our competitors, but you know, our sales are growing 30% month over month right now. So this is not a business that's really kind of in the doldrums and just needs to pull back on spending. And I think you have to be smart and you have to really, again, make a more affirmative, proactive case. But we are spending more. I know that that's not indicative of the average company. So I wish I had an answer for how companies who are pulling back, but for us, this is our moment and we don't want to let it go by.
Yep. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, even for us, and we're obviously a different angle, a different dimension of the real estate space. While it's not so much our spend, but our engagement, the way we're engaging digitally in particular, and sharing content and thought leadership is actually accelerated pretty significantly. I think to your answer a couple of moments ago around what people were used to doing, the framework of how they engage with businesses and companies has changed dramatically. So you kind of need to hopefully take advantage of that. Another really great question that just came through is, what effect do you think the Gen Z generation will have on corporations and brands and as a whole as they move into leadership roles in the next 20 to 30 years? And do you see yourself as a brand meeting, you know, that audience, perhaps where it's going?
It's a great question. I think it's obviously something we wrestle with a lot and try to help our customers navigate, and particularly as relates to when someone shows up at work, you know, what do they believe is their connection with their you know, employer and everything like that. Less so how do they consume third-party brands. But I think probably the dominant thing that we see is, you know, there's an old model of like, I'm an Alcoa man, or I'm a GM man, or something. Like, your employer defines you. Right. And I think Gen Z is very good at saying, like, we're going to define our employer. And you saw that, you know, this summer with protests around Black Lives Matter and people saying, like, I'm going to write letters to my senator, I'm going to protest, and also I'm going to lobby my employer to reflect the values or the perceptions, you know, I have. And so rather than your personality, your desires, your sort of like way of navigating the world being subsumed to Johnson & Johnson corporate culture, I think there's an understanding that employees kind of get together, they assert what they want, and it's the employer's job or the brand's job to reflect that, which I think is an awesome development And companies have to get much, much better at listening and much more bottoms up and much less coercive if they want to navigate it well. But there's going to be great rewards for companies that do a good job of it.
Yeah, and create cultures that kind of enable that in some way. It is a really interesting shift. Couple more questions. Okay, this is a great one. 5 generations in the workplace all learn differently. Can you comment on the responsibility companies will have to teach in the new era of work? I don't know if, I don't know if you can answer the teach, but you certainly, as you have 5 generations in an industrious space, what are you seeing in terms of sort of engagement with certain aspects or interest or comfort in your space, or not, or has the generational sort of divide sort of flattened to a degree? I'd like to think so.
I think both are true. I think there's, in certain ways, generational flattening. And in the other hand, what COVID has sort of illuminated is everybody's different. Some people have 4 kids they're taking care of at home. Some people have elderly parents they're taking care of. Some people are stuck in a studio apartment and bored out of their minds, and they want to work 18 hours a day. And then there's everything in between. And so I think that's going to hopefully be one of the great outcomes of the moment at hand, is recognizing even within generations, there's just a lot of diversity in the way people work and what they need out of their workplace. And again, that sort of empowerment focused or bottoms up focused workplace structures that give employees the tools to decide what they want to do are going to be the ones that win out. And I think that is also true of corporate training. Like, there's just no question, you don't get to leave college at 22 and now your learning is done and the next 50 years is spent working. You have to keep learning to keep up. And I think companies are right now figuring out what it looks like to be a partner for their employees in doing that in a way that's more individualized. Because the way that corporate training works at Johnson & Johnson is you watch these 3 videos. It's very clear that doesn't work with 5 different generations in a workplace, let alone with 100,000 very different people with different methods of learning in a workplace.
Yeah.
So Jamie, I want to do one last question. Isabel, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for you, which is, what is the big innovation that's going to come out of the COVID period? But I just love what you just said, which actually has nothing to do with COVID or the pandemic, which is more around that big theme of how companies will support and continue to educate and nurture their talent in the future. So maybe that's not a question, that's more of a statement. And I think an interesting one to almost conclude the discussion on I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that feels like a pretty big statement and a really interesting one that has a lot of positivity around it, if you want to comment.
I think that is particularly what Gen Z, but I think that's what everyone wants right now. Like the kind of, we're going to coddle you and serve you monkfish dinner in the cafeteria, that's nice. But that McKinsey, there are companies that historically did this well and it fell out of favor. You're going to work at Goldman Sachs for 4 years and it's going to transform your career. That particular way of thinking about what role a company could play in their employee's life, I think that's about to skyrocket. And the companies that do that well, people are going to gravitate to those companies.
Yep. Really positive note. Really exciting times for you, certainly, for us at CBRE, as we think about the whole real estate ecosystem and all the innovation and adaptability that's taking place. So I know I gleaned an awful lot of insights just from these 45 minutes. I'm sure everyone listening in, and hopefully those who have an opportunity to listen to a replay will as well. So I want to personally thank you, Jamie, for being such a great partner and getting to know you a little bit more, which has been awesome. Hopefully we get to see each other face to face one of these days.
I would love that.
And Izzy, you're welcome.
Yeah,
Izzy,
I'll close out. Jamie, you're always welcome in Westchester anytime.
Okay, deal.
Thank you. I'm inviting. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Jamie, so much for joining us and sharing your experience with our audience. Even though you're not formally a CMO, you have, of course,
well, I think
everything's marketing. So, starting a company and branding and learning about kind of how you founded Industrious in the first place, I think is really really relevant for the brand marketers tuning in. So thank you.
Fair enough. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
This is
Benji,
great.
for coming back.
Anytime.
We'll see you both soon.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into that session. We have one last session today. Really, really excited to welcome Laurel Rossi to the stage. Laurel is the founder of Creative Spirit, and I don't want to tell too much about her story. I'll let her do that. But in 2017, Laurel and two colleagues founded Creative Spirit, which is the only global nonprofit focused on the future of work for individuals with intellectual, developmental, and learning disabilities at the best companies in the world. So it's, amazing work you're doing, Laurel, and I've loved, learning about it over the past few weeks and to learn more about it from you now. So I'm gonna hand it over to you to give a quick keynote, and then we'll welcome Diana in to have a discussion with you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and letting us talk a little bit about Creative Spirit. I wanted to start, I was going to share some slides. I'm not sure I'm not sure my share is on, so I'll talk to it a little bit. There we go. The opportunity to talk about the future of work is really a profound one in that we're really talking about people and what's going to happen going forward. The future of work, in my opinion, and the opinion of my colleagues, is that it's completely intersectional. And we've learned a lot over the past couple of years in terms of exactly what that means. There are a lot of constituents who will either benefit or be left behind in the new work reality. And so one of the things that I love talking about often is that the voices of the most marginalized, from people of color to the LGBTQI community and to those with disability, which is near and dear to my heart, really have the opportunity to use this moment as a chance to excel and exceed in this environment. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the how in a minute. The American disability movement is one of the oldest movements in this country and one of the most successful. And the longest standing sit-in in this country was actually around ADA. And so with that, I love to think about disability and working as a social justice movement that just hasn't, come into its own. And it's really, really wonderful that I'm here today talking about it, because this is the 75th anniversary of the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And, it was originally thought of as something that would benefit those after World War II in a fantastic way, to get them work and to really create awareness around those with physical disabilities. We'll fast forward about 30 years after that, to learn that, we are leaving those with intellectual disabilities out of that conversation. And so, the US recognized the fact that we needed to acknowledge that population and hopefully get them to work. And so, this chat is about getting those who are marginalized to the table and who've been fighting the fight for a really long time. And I want to talk about why employment is the way forward. There are 1 billion people around the globe with some form of disability, and 1 in 5 employees in all of our companies is touched by this topic in some way. It's either personal to them, it's a caregiver issue, it's a family member, it's a child, et cetera. And so the future of work, particularly if you think about COVID and what's going on, is so profoundly impacted by the fact that we are home with our families, maybe doing triple duty if you have someone with a disability in your household. And so this notion that disability is arm's length for most is completely untrue. And one of the things we're finding is that CEOs who are focused on this topic really understand that they are doing an incredible service, not just to those with disabilities in terms of bringing them into the labor force, but also giving caregivers an opportunity to really show up for work and be their true selves. One of the things that the Ford Foundation, the WHO, everybody knows is that a productive life is a full life. And so the reason that this intersects so beautifully with employment is because it conquers lots of issues. It's not just economic justice, but it's health issues. It's, improvement of obesity rates. I mean, all the good things that we want for everybody. And so some of the things that led us down this path at Creative Spirit, which I'll talk about in a sec, I'll just show you a quick film, which will tell the story beautifully because it tells it in our constituents' own words. One of the things that impacts disability so profoundly is stigma, low expectation, the presumption of incompetence. And what we found when we started to look around the United States alone is that there are 43 million folks who are impacted by this topic, and 85% of those with intellectual disabilities are out of a job. They've never worked, or they've had a job for short periods of time, and they work less than what the poverty line would suggest, which is 52 hours a month. And if they do work, often they are working for under minimum wage, well under minimum wage, or for free just to have something to do. And so this stigma of incompetence is something that we're working really hard at Creative Spirit to poke holes in and really showcase ability. And that presumption of ability goes a very long way. One of the things that is particular to this industry, and we're working with a lot of our marketing and media and entertainment partners, like the Sonys, like the IPGs, like the Omnicoms, et cetera, of the world, is to really use media as a way to destigmatize and to improve the perception and the reputation of those with disabilities in the community as well. Let's see if I can advance my slide a little bit. The centerpiece of this entire issue is really the notion of poverty and isolation. And you can talk about, COVID in so many different ways right now, but this is a population that really understands isolation. And I think we're all feeling a little bit of those with those with disabilities feel every single day. And that social isolation is really something that profoundly affects mental health, physical health, and obviously your ability to achieve economic justice over the long run. On and underemployment really impacts millions. We have 1 million young adults. I don't know if any of you've seen the 60 Minutes piece a couple of weeks ago, just on autism alone. We have 1.1 million young adults coming into the workforce over the next 5 years who are going to be looking for gainful employment. And so we really are focused on looking at why and how these individuals are being screened out of jobs. Are there things that are going on in our very fragile tech economy that can really be helpful? And so we've started to focus on things like, are the algorithms supporting the job search process working or not working, et cetera. And this idea of un- and underemployment is something we need to cure for the long run, because we've got this raft of talented people who want to come into the workplace. And so when you start to think about the future of work and those who may have been home in isolation during COVID, think about what it means to have a disability, but to have enormous technical skills because you've grown up that way, either at school or because you've had to, and what your future might be like when the job market opens up, et cetera. So making diversity and inclusion more inclusive is something that we've really been focused on because one of the things we've learned is that the definition of DE&I largely does not include disability. And so when I look at some of the things that the Ford Foundation is doing to say, oh my God, intersectionality has to start with the disability community, because that is the community that really understands what it's like to be the most excluded. I want to talk for a minute before I show you a film about Creative Spirit, about our movement and our movement, during this year of, big celebrations, 30 years of ADA, 75 years of EAM. And the rights exist for folks to be employed, but the thing that doesn't exist is the action. And so what we've really focused on over the past 2 years since we started Creative Spirit is to put a game plan in place for CMOs. We started with the marketing community. There's no community better on earth that understands soft skills, hard skills, and everything in between, and who have reached out. We have 27 companies who've reached out to partner with us and to help us find jobs. Everyone we found a job for over the past 2 years is still in their position. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's happened during COVID later. But our Hire Different movement is really intersectional in that we acknowledge those with disabilities. We don't turn anyone down who's looking for a job, but our role is really to teach organizations, CHROs, CMOs, CEOs, how to go about hiring those with disabilities. And so along with us, what I'd love to say is that I'd love to see everybody coming out of this COVID scenario and during this time where we're really rethinking the future of the workforce, really focused on hiring differently. So with that, can I show you a little film about creative spirit? I'd like to show you a little film about creative spirit in the words of our own constituents. Thank you. I think Vishal was going to show. Thank you.
Hi, Laurel. That was fantastic. It's really an inspiring video and a great way to kick off this conversation. So it's really interesting watching that video and thinking about the context of disabled workers in this particular year, which has been a tough year for workers, you know, in any category with any different kind of background. So how has the pandemic impacted life for disabled workers?
So, you know, there are obviously two ways to think about this. One is you've got a population, people with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by pretty much anything that goes on. And so you can imagine that statistically, you know, the job numbers being what they are to begin with, the furloughs, et cetera, would impact them far more dramatically. Think about access, think about, you know, being able to get from one place to the other without your support systems, et cetera. I think it's been a little bit harder on the younger folks, you know, that are still in academia, because that's workers, you know, who can work from home. Actually, there's been a little bit of an uptick in two things. One is you largely have a population that has learned through technology almost their entire lives. And so working at home has been something that's a little bit more natural to them, and they have to do everything over Zoom and conference call and using tools and all kinds of, you know, multitasking to get things done. So that's actually gone quite well. We have a very large pipeline of candidates and talent that we manage on an ongoing basis. And so I can talk a little bit about how we've, you know, kept in touch with them and how we're actually keeping them up with the positive things about being able to work from home. The other thing about working from home real quick is that, as I mentioned earlier, these are workers and people who have lived in isolation almost their entire lives. And so we're all sort of squirming around and miserable about it right now. But the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, they're quite used to being a little bit more isolated than most. And so in a way, I think it started to create a fair amount of empathy, particularly among employers.
Very interesting. So you talk about those ways that they are adapting as well to working at home and whatnot. Have there been any learning curves? And then what are you doing to help support both the employees and the employers?
Yeah, the support has been really fun and intense, and it's actually taught us a lot too. Part of the support for candidates and also for those employed are, let me start with those employed. Some have been furloughed. Very few lost their jobs. Some went to part-time. And we worked very directly with their employers to be sure that they can, you know, come back to work when things open up, negotiate hours. We'd help negotiate hours on their behalf and job sharing and things like that. So that's one thing that we were instrumental, I think, in pulling together. The other thing is for those that are candidates or those that were in the pipeline for a position, we actually doubled down on all of the training. And so whether it was prescribed training, interview skills, watching video, doubling up on our interviews and coaching sessions with those candidates and those in the pipeline for employment. We did all of that and are still doing that during COVID. And I'm really happy to say we've put quite a few people to work with the 27 companies we work with today. And they are all still in their jobs to this day. So for the 2 years that running and subsequently to the first person we placed, everybody's still in their job today. And a lot of it has to do with our coaching model.
That's amazing. That's very impressive. In doing this new virtual living in virtual roles, you know, for you guys, what are the things that you're going to keep even when you go back to the office, you know, and in terms of working with both your candidates as well as the employees and the clients that you serve?
Yeah, well, this has been a really foundational point in time. This summer, we did a big gala in March, like right before COVID happened. It was almost a miracle that it got pulled off. Talk about by the grace of God. And right after that, everybody sort of went into quiet mode, but we had this huge level of interest from our corporate partners. And so we used this time to really pick their brain. We launched a seminal study on disability in the workplace that is creating a lot of fantastic findings that we are just starting to implement. And so part of it is it gave us a little bit of quiet time from our normal day-to-day to be able to think about the future. But also, I think coming out of COVID, what we've learned is that we really have to double down to get people to understand what we're talking about. We really have to spend the time doing that communication, doing the myth busting that we had to do anyway, because people are so distracted right now. And I think that employers and HR departments are really, really, really obsessed right now with how to keep their talent pools happy and how to keep them focused. And so we're fighting for our fair share of attention. But I have to say, for the employers that we work with today, it's been an amazing opportunity to really, get in bed with them and help them work through their DE&I challenges.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. When we were talking yesterday, it's a tough time in the economy for anybody looking for a job. And so I imagine that it's challenging, even more challenging for you as you're, trying to educate and get into these HR departments and really let people know about this great talent pool.
Yeah. I think, a couple things that are fundamental. The myth busting around our candidates is just something that has to continue to go on, and whether we use our marketing might to make sure that everybody message is one thing. The second thing is myth busting around what it takes to hire somebody with a disability. Frankly, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the rights are there, but how to do it is really tough. And I am very, very, very sympathetic to companies who have the initiative and they have the intention to go in and do a bang up job, DE&I wise, disability, everyone included, but they don't know how. And when we launched our study, one of the things that we learned is that disability is very low on the list of DE&I inclusion, right? People just don't even include it in their list. 5% of CHROs really include disability on their list. It's not that they're ignoring it, it's just not at the top of their list. And so when we're able to go in and say, we know where to find candidates, we know how to train candidates, we know how to train your HR department, we know how to provide coaching and the ongoing help that you need, and that's lifelong, and it doesn't cost anything, we start to get people's attention. And that's really something that I think is fundamentally appealing because, again, the intent is there, and this sort of inward look on the part of corporations right now to really want to serve a more integrated and intersectional population is really there. We've just got to show them how.
Right. You said that this population has one of the biggest issues in terms of being employed, just in general. And so would you say the biggest barriers, what are the biggest obstacles to entry, to connecting these well-intentioned corporations that want to hire people and then, people who want to be employed? Like, what are the challenges to getting the job moving forward?
Well, the pipeline in getting the candidates to the table, you would think would be naturally easy. I mean, you've got a group of people who are naturally inclined to social media. They have time on their hands if they're not working to really engage. They're looking to be social. And so a lot of what we do, it comes from our own marketing craft and being able to attract candidates. The second thing that we do is we work really closely with big academic institutions. We just started working with the whole CUNY system, which is really exciting in New York. So that's an awful big population of folks. And then, of course, there are 1,000 other ways that candidates come to us, working with National Downs, working with Autism Society, working with Williams Syndrome Society, et cetera. And so we have a great feeder pool. I think once we can get the candidates, the qualified candidates, who we then train and teach how to interview and build their resumes and build their LinkedIns, it's really a matter of connecting them with the HR department. And one of the things that we're finding is when our candidates try to use natural means, I go on one of the platforms, there really isn't the right inclination. The keyword searches aren't really finding them. And so one of the things we're building is a real focus on how do we automate some of this process and make sure we're making that connection between the companies and the candidates? From a hands-on perspective, when we work with the companies, it's really natural for us to really sit and become a part of their HR department. Our director of candidate services works very closely with them, and we're sort of a consultant. And we'll bring in the right coach for our candidates once we get them placed. We'll train the HR managers in terms of how to conduct an interview. In the beginning, if you've never done it before, it probably seems a little off-putting or scary, or just something you've never done before. But it's really been a great learning experience all the way around. And we've been producing training materials over the course of a couple of years, but now we're sort of on a fast track to make a lot of that information self-serve.
So what does it look like? I'm a company that wants to come to you and look for these candidates to, be more inclusive, and we come to you and tell you kind of what jobs we're looking for to fill, or how is it?
Yeah, a couple things. We will talk about the posts that you have, because what we're really looking for, as I mentioned earlier, fair wage, integrated positions. We want our folks to be sitting next to their peers. We want them to be engaged the same way and be paid the same way as their peers. And so we will look at the job postings, and we will make sure that whatever that position is has the right accommodations in place for that particular individual or individuals, and try to make that natural fit. And as I mentioned earlier, when you start to think about automating some of this, I think it's going to go a long way in terms of doing this at scale. But for today, we sit with the HR department, the recruiters, et cetera, and then we make that match between our resumes and our candidates who we know so well and those job postings. And then we go on to do much more than that in terms of assigning a coach, both to the hiring manager. So if you're managing someone from our Creative Spirit talent pool, you will be able to work with that coach, and you will be able to have that coaching on an ongoing basis, because our ultimate goal is retention. And so that's really how the process works. I'll tell you a little bit about our coaches too in a minute.
Okay, you were just saying how your candidates have retained their position. So it's like you have this long relationship with your candidates. You keep in touch with them after they've been placed. And
that's right.
Okay.
And we think that part of that is because the coaching aspect is really the aspect that makes it work best. The coaching aspect allows us to work through, any kind of potential obstacle to retention over the long run. And those coaches don't just work with the candidates, they work with the hiring manager so that they can connect and be sure that the hiring manager very privately can solve some of their business problems. Our coaches are, by and large, ex business folks, ex professionals. It's not all, in a business setting all the time. We do some food service things, we do some other things, but they're professionals who have been in the field. So they understand the business side of it, but they also understand, of course, the candidate side of it. So unlike a traditional coach where you might get a social worker, assigned to somebody in the disability community, this is really somebody with more business experience attached to that social work aspect.
That's very interesting. So what kind of new discoveries have you made now during this strange period of working from home that you're going to take forward when offices reopen?
Yeah, I think that, up until now, our whole model has been about, educating the HR teams. Let me back up. CEOs have been approached tremendously and have been extremely open to saying, you know what, this has to be on our agenda. Disability, inclusion, all kinds of inclusion. And then it kind of gets ported over to the HR teams. And so what we've learned is that rather than starting now with a big social justice conversation or an economic justice conversation for people with disabilities, we kind of get right to it. And I think that COVID has taught us a couple of things. One is everybody's been incredibly curious and busy around the idea of hiring a more intersectional talent pool. And so we don't have to start the conversation with why you need to do this. We generally now start the conversation with a much more presumptive this is how you do that. And I think we've learned that the other thing is, while we may all be technically fantastic now at home, managing, Zoom calls and writing and calling and doing 1,000 things at the multitasking at the same time, the interesting thing is that it's put a laser focus on accessibility, e-accessibility in particular. And so one of the things we are coming out of this COVID period with is to really go back to our corporate partners and talk about e-accessibility across the board, because it helps all employees in the population. And what I mean by that is really thinking about, what does your website look like? What do the tools at work look like? How do you set up arrangements, especially with COVID, where people are either sitting, way far apart, or they're clustering in different ways? How do we reconfigure the accessibility factor so that everybody is advantaged? Because everybody right now is a little tender about how interpersonal communication is going to go, in the new world order. And we're really studying that. So that's been a big focus of ours right now.
Very interesting. You mentioned a bit about the social justice movements and whatnot, and I'm curious if any of that has changed, driven transformation within your organization.
You mean at Creative Spirit?
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. I think, beginning in March with the gala, when we really, we were this little kind of cottage movement in the beginning. The origins of Creative Spirit were a bunch of colleagues in the advertising business. One person in particular worked at Droga5 in Sydney, really, piqued my interest, and Gina Grillo, a colleague who was the CEO at the Ad Club, piqued our interest about this in, I think it was 2015, and said, we hired one individual with Down syndrome and it completely changed the atmosphere of our company. Forget about what it did for him. We won't even talk about that because it wasn't charity. Let's talk about what it did for the culture. And so I think that, being able to bottle that and carry that around for the past couple of years, that story, the anecdotes, the wonderful feeling, the goodwill that's created that you saw even in the video among our candidates, it's really great. But I think what's happened now, and what's happened for us, is it's put Creative Spirit squarely in the middle of the social justice movement. And this whole notion of Hire Different is really a brand and an emblem that we need to carry forward for everybody. And we're really happy to have it start with disability, but we think it has to happen for everyone.
It's amazing that it's been 75 years since the Disabilities Act. It's really, it's such a milestone. So you were talking a bit about how you've learned the difference, how to run your nonprofit differently this year. You kind of said that when you were in COVID, rethinking and what it means to run Creative Spirit, and what kind of new ideas have you come up with?
So I think the study that I mentioned earlier that we had launched, will tell us a lot. One of the things that we are very much focused on, and while every organization needs funding and its own economic justice, I guess, to move forward, in a dramatic way, we really want to scale this notion. We are looking to place 1 million candidates by the end of the decade. No ifs, ands, or buts. We're setting our, that's 1 out of 10 million. So we feel like that's a good goal, but it's a lot of people. And we know to do this at scale, we have to do things a little bit differently moving forward. We know that we're going to have to fundamentally teach people how to go forward and do this. And we also know that we're going to need the kind of funding it's going to take to build technology that's going to make this a reality. And so we're really laser focused on the funding aspect and how to change the business model. In our study, one of the things that we learned and really opened our eyes was that, people value what they pay for. And it's really nice that we go into organizations and we do this for free. And it's really nice that there's no cost to the candidates, et cetera. But actually, we've learned that the HR department expects to pay for these services. I don't know that we're going to be, charging, consulting-esque rates from that perspective. I don't think that's really our mission. But if we place a candidate, a valuable candidate, than the corporate teams expect to pay for those candidates. And so we're working through interesting things now, like what's our business model moving forward. We still work with foundations who are incredibly interested in what we're doing, of course. And so they've been extremely generous. We've had extremely generous supporters. The Advertising Club of New York is one of our founding partners. They've been extremely generous through their foundation in making this a reality. Voya, Verizon, Omnicom, Disney. There have been so many companies who have been so generous in terms of really looking at it as a contribution out of their foundations or out of their charity budgets, if you will. But now we're thinking about it more as a business moving forward as well.
Very interesting. So I'd like to close with my last question, which is just what will work life look like in 2021 and beyond for your community?
Yeah. The dream state is the dream state, still the dream state. And that is that there will be fair wage positions for everyone. That 50% of the population isn't working for free, volunteering at the local school just to get out of the house. And that this new intersectional world really benefits everybody. Everybody's sitting shoulder to shoulder. Work life is accessible for everyone or accessible for everyone. And that this is a conversation that doesn't happen among the 1 in 5 employees who are trying to juggle their children with disabilities at home, and it's a rare instance, but it's something that we really focus on in terms of a square conversation in the lunchroom, and that everybody is back to work physically and we get to see each other again, and that everybody's really moving behind this higher different movement.
Wonderful. I really wish you all the best with this. It's a wonderful project, and I look forward to having you back and hearing more about how the progress is, especially when things reopen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You've been so great.
Thank you. It's been quite a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Diana and Laurel. And Laurel, I had not seen that video before we started, and it's really amazing. So, and it's great to see all the companies and the brands that you guys have worked with, and it says a lot about those companies as well, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for everything.
Thank you both so much. We'll see you soon. Thank you to everyone. Thanks to all of our speakers for joining us here today. With our inaugural Future of Work live cast, it was such an amazing packed day, and we heard from folks in technology, in real estate, in flex workspace, so you name it, and for such engaging and insightful conversations. So I know I took a ton out of hearing from those speakers, and I hope you all did too. So we hope you'll join us tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern for one of our tentpole live casts on women in marketing. We'll be joined by senior marketers from Tailored Brands, Del Taco, Electronic Arts, Lyft, T. Rowe Price, and more. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you back here soon. Bye.